Poor Duchess. Have you ever seen the Duke look at her the way he looks at parliamentary reports? The laughter came softly, polite enough to avoid scandal, cruel enough to wound. Genevieve Ashford did not turn around. She stood near the edge of Lady Harcourt's sunlit drawing room, her gloved hands folded loosely before her, while conversations drifted through the spring gathering like invisible currents. The remark had come from two women seated beside a lace-covered tea table. They believed she could not hear them, or perhaps they believed she would pretend not to. Both possibilities hurt equally. "It is rather sad," the second woman replied. "She is lovely. Of course she is lovely." Another small laugh followed. "But beauty does not matter if a husband never notices." Genevieve lifted her teacup. The porcelain remained perfectly steady in her hand. Years of practice had taught her that dignity often consisted of nothing more than refusing to flinch when people expected you to. Across the room, sunlight poured through tall windows overlooking the gardens. Music drifted from a pianist somewhere nearby. Guests smiled. Servants circulated with trays of pastries and fresh tea. Everything appeared elegant. Everything appeared civilized. Yet humiliation rarely announced itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in silk and pleasant conversation. The second woman lowered her voice. "Do you suppose he regrets the marriage?" Genevieve set her teacup down before she dropped it. That question landed harder than the others. Not because she had never asked it herself, because hearing it from strangers made the loneliness suddenly public. She moved away before either woman noticed her. Her expression remained calm. Her spine remained straight. No one watching her cross the room would have guessed that every word had found its mark. Outside, the afternoon air felt cooler. Genevieve stepped onto the stone terrace and released a slow breath. Beyond the gardens, rolling fields stretched toward the horizon. The countryside looked peaceful beneath the bright April sky. She wished peace came as easily to people as it did to landscapes. "Your Grace." Genevieve turned. Lady Harcourt approached carrying a fan and a concerned expression. "Are you leaving already?" "I am afraid so." "What a disappointment." The older woman linked an arm gently through hers. "Everyone was delighted you attended." Genevieve smiled. "That is kind." Lady Harcourt studied her carefully. "You look tired." For one dangerous moment, Genevieve nearly laughed. Tired felt like an inadequate word for 7 years of waiting. "Only a little. Then go home and rest." "Home." The word felt complicated these days. Nevertheless, she nodded politely. 20 minutes later, her carriage rolled away from the estate and onto the main road leading toward Ravenshire Hall. The countryside passed in quiet green waves beyond the window. Fields, stone walls, scattered cottages. Familiar landmarks she had traveled past hundreds of times before. Normally she enjoyed these drives. Today she found herself staring at her reflection in the glass. Poor Duchess. Beauty does not matter if a husband never notices. She closed her eyes. The words lingered despite her efforts to dismiss them. The cruelest part was not that strangers believed them. The cruelest part was that she could no longer entirely disagree. By the time Ravenshire Hall appeared in the distance, the sun had begun sinking toward late afternoon. The great house rose from the landscape with its usual quiet authority. Stone towers gleamed beneath the golden light. Formal gardens spread across acres of carefully maintained grounds. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. Yet sometimes beauty could feel surprisingly empty. A footman opened the carriage door as soon as she arrived. "Welcome home, Your Grace." "Thank you." The familiar entrance hall greeted her with polished marble floors and sunlight streaming through enormous windows. Several servants moved efficiently through the space. Somewhere upstairs a clock chimed 4 times. Everything remained exactly as it should. Everything except her. Mrs. Parker appeared almost immediately. The maid had served her since the first year of her marriage and possessed an extraordinary ability to sense trouble before anyone spoke of it. One glance was all it took. "What happened?" Genevieve handed over her gloves. "Nothing happened." Mrs. Parker raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you look as though you attended your own funeral?" Despite herself, Genevieve smiled faintly. "You always exaggerate." "Only when necessary." They began walking toward the main staircase. Was the gathering unpleasant? Genevieve hesitated. "Not especially." "Which means yes." The older woman waited patiently. Finally, Genevieve sighed. I overheard a conversation. Mrs. Parker's expression darkened immediately. What sort of conversation? The usual sort. She attempted a light tone. People discussing my marriage as though it were a weather forecast. Idiots. Genevieve laughed softly. Probably. Definitely. The maid folded her arms. And what did these idiots have to say? Genevieve looked away. For a moment she considered avoiding the answer. Then she realized she no longer had the energy. They wondered whether Sebastian regrets marrying me. Silence followed. Mrs. Parker stopped walking entirely. That is absurd. Perhaps. No. The maid's voice sharpened. It is absurd. Genevieve wished she shared the certainty. Instead, she continued upstairs. Her private sitting room overlooked the western gardens. Afternoon sunlight illuminated shelves lined with books and fresh flowers arranged near the windows. Normally, the room comforted her. Today, it felt strangely temporary. A writing desk stood beside the fireplace. One drawer remained locked. Inside rested a letter. She knew this because she had written it herself. Mrs. Parker followed her gaze, then looked toward the desk. Understanding immediately crossed her face. You still have not destroyed it. Genevieve crossed the room slowly. No. The maid's voice softened. Genevieve. Very few people used her first name. Mrs. Parker earned the privilege years ago. How long has it been? Genevieve opened the drawer and removed the folded letter. Cream-colored paper. Less than 200 words. 7 years of marriage reduced to a single page. 3 months. The maid inhaled quietly. And you still mean to leave? Genevieve stared at the letter. Every day I tell myself I should not. And every day I find another reason. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Merely sad. Mrs. Parker touched her shoulder gently. Have you spoken to him? A faint smile appeared. About which part? Any of it. Genevieve folded the letter carefully. No. The answer carried its own explanation. Because speaking required hope. Hope required believing something might change. She was no longer certain of either. A knock interrupted the conversation. A young footman appeared moments later. Your Grace. Yes. A message from London. Genevieve accepted the envelope. The seal belonged to the committee overseeing the charitable music foundation she supported. Relief flickered briefly. At least one problem today seemed straightforward. She opened the letter and began reading. The relief disappeared almost immediately. Mrs. Parker noticed. What is it? Genevieve lowered the page. The concert. Tonight's concert? Yes. The foundation had spent 6 months organizing the event. Funds raised would support music education programs throughout 3 counties. Genevieve had personally coordinated much of the effort. More importantly, Sebastian had promised to attend. Not because she asked repeatedly, because he volunteered. The memory returned clearly. 3 weeks earlier, a rare breakfast shared together. I know how important this is to you, he had said. I will be there. Simple words. Nothing dramatic. Yet she had believed them. Now she continued reading the letter. Her stomach tightened. Mrs. Parker watched anxiously. Genevieve. She handed over the page. The maid read quickly, then closed her eyes. Oh no. The message was brief. A parliamentary delegation had arrived unexpectedly in London. Urgent discussions required the Duke's immediate attention. He would remain in the city. Attendance impossible. Regrets offered. Formal apologies attached. Everything entirely reasonable. Everything entirely predictable. Genevieve crossed toward the window. Outside, gardeners moved between flower beds. The estate carried on peacefully beneath the afternoon sun. He forgot. Mrs. Parker's voice held frustration. No. Genevieve shook her head. He remembered. Somehow that felt worse. Forgotten promises could be excused. This had been a choice. Duty first. Everything else afterward. As always, the maid approached carefully. He had no control over parliamentary schedules. I know. Genevieve smiled faintly. That is the problem. She always knew. She always understood. Every absence possessed a reasonable explanation. Every disappointment arrived with a practical justification. Sebastian never intended harm. Yet intentions did not erase consequences. The room grew quiet. Finally, Mrs. Parker spoke again. "What will you do?" Genevieve looked toward the locked drawer, toward the letter hidden inside, toward the future she had been avoiding for months. "I will attend the concert." Her voice remained steady. "I will smile politely. And afterward?" The question lingered. Genevieve stared through the window at the estate she had spent 7 years helping build, the home she loved, the life she had carefully maintained, the marriage she no longer recognized. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Sebastian sat in a London meeting room discussing matters that undoubtedly felt important. Perhaps they were important. That was never the issue. The issue was that everything else always seemed less so. She lowered her eyes, then placed the letter from London beside the one hidden inside the drawer. 2 pieces of paper. 2 very different endings. "Afterward," she said quietly, "I think I will stop waiting." Outside, the sunlight slowly faded across Ravenshire Hall, and for the first time in 7 years, Genevieve Ashford began to wonder what her life might look like if she finally chose herself instead of hoping someone else eventually would. The charity concert exceeded every expectation. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Grand Assembly Hall in Ashbourne shimmered beneath hundreds of gas lamps. Elegant gowns swept across polished floors. Musicians tuned instruments beneath a painted ceiling. Wealthy patrons filled rows of velvet-covered seats. Laughter drifted through the air alongside the scent of fresh flowers and candle wax. Genevieve moved through the crowd with practiced grace. She greeted donors, thanked committee members, welcomed performers, smiled whenever required. No one would have guessed that her heart felt unusually tired. "Your Grace." Miss Abigail Turner hurried toward her from the musician's entrance. The young teacher looked breathless with excitement. "The children are ready." Genevieve immediately smiled. The smile felt genuine. "Are they nervous?" "Terrified." Abigail laughed softly. "Which means they will probably be wonderful." Genevieve glanced toward the stage where several village students waited for their performance. Months of preparation had led to this evening. Many of those children had never touched a piano before receiving scholarships through the foundation. Tonight they would perform before nobility, politicians, and benefactors from across 3 counties. That mattered. More than headlines. More than society gossip. More than wounded pride. "Tell them I am proud of them." Abigail nodded. Then her expression shifted slightly. "And tell them His Grace sends his regrets?" The question arrived gently, yet it still found its target. News traveled quickly in aristocratic circles. Genevieve kept her smile in place. "You may tell them His Grace is serving the country." Abigail appeared immediately uncomfortable. "I apologize." "There is nothing to apologize for." The teacher touched her arm briefly before hurrying away. Genevieve remained where she stood. Around her, conversation continued. Music drifted from the stage. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across the room. Everything appeared beautiful. Everything appeared successful. Yet one empty chair in the front row seemed to draw her attention repeatedly. She hated herself for noticing it. More than that, she hated herself for still caring. The concert began shortly afterward. Applause filled the hall. Performers moved gracefully through a carefully planned program. Several renowned musicians traveled from London specifically for the event. The audience responded enthusiastically. Donations exceeded expectations. By every measurable standard, the evening represented a triumph. Then the children took the stage. Genevieve sat near the front and watched as 12 students from Ravenshire's music scholarship program nervously approached their instruments. Some looked no older than 10. One little girl nearly tripped on her dress before reaching the piano. The audience smiled warmly. The performance began. Simple melodies filled the hall. Nothing technically extraordinary. Yet the pride shining in those young faces transformed every note into something meaningful. Genevieve felt tears threaten unexpectedly. Not from sadness, from joy. These moments reminded her why she worked so hard, why she cared, why she stayed involved despite everything else. When the final piece ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. The children looked stunned, delighted, overwhelmed. Genevieve applauded until her hands hurt. For a few precious minutes, She forgot her own troubles entirely. Later, during intermission, she found herself standing beside a refreshment table while guests discussed the performance. Several committee members offered congratulations. Donations continued arriving. The foundation's future looked secure. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she found herself staring toward the empty chair again. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You built something remarkable." Genevieve turned. Lord Nathaniel Blackwood stood nearby holding a glass of sparkling water. Tall, composed, and quietly observant, he possessed the sort of presence that never demanded attention yet somehow attracted it anyway. She recognized him immediately. They had met several times through charitable work over the years. "Lord Blackwood, Your Grace." He inclined his head politely. "The children were excellent. They worked very hard." "So did you." The simple observation caught her off guard. Most people praised results. Few acknowledged effort. Nathaniel seemed to notice details others overlooked. "Thank you." His gaze moved briefly across the crowded hall, then returned to her. "I noticed something." Genevieve smiled faintly. "That sounds dangerous." A hint of amusement touched his expression. "Only slightly." "Very well. Every person here speaks about what the foundation has accomplished." He paused. "Nobody mentions how many years you spent building it." The comment lingered unexpectedly. Genevieve looked away. "The foundation matters more than the person who started it." "That sounds noble." Nathaniel studied her carefully. "I am not convinced it is true." Before she could respond, another group approached requesting her attention. Donations, logistics, future programs, necessary conversations. By the time she looked back, Nathaniel had disappeared into the crowd. Yet his words remained with her. "Nobody mentions how many years you spent building it." Strange. She had never realized how rarely anyone acknowledged the work itself. Near the end of the evening, the chairman of the foundation requested a brief speech. Genevieve reluctantly agreed. Standing before hundreds of guests had never intimidated her. Tonight felt different somehow. The audience quieted as she approached the podium. Warm light illuminated the stage. Faces filled every row. "Thank you for joining us." Her voice carried easily through the hall. Tonight was never about music alone. She glanced toward the students seated together near the front. It was about opportunity. Applause followed. She continued speaking, not about herself, about education, community, possibility, the causes she genuinely cared about. The audience listened attentively. Everything proceeded smoothly. Then one sentence changed the atmosphere entirely. It came from a woman seated near the front, spoken quietly, yet not quite quietly enough. "Perhaps next year the Duke will attend." A few people laughed. Not maliciously, not loudly, yet Genevieve heard it. So did everyone nearby. Silence followed. Brief, awkward, the kind of silence that arrives when a joke lands too close to truth. Genevieve felt heat rise beneath her skin. Not anger, humiliation, public, unavoidable. The woman immediately looked horrified by her own words. Several guests stared at their laps. Others glanced toward Genevieve with sympathy. Sympathy proved almost worse. For one dangerous second, the room seemed to tilt. 7 years of disappointments condensed into a single moment. The empty chair, the gossip, the whispers, the pity. Then Genevieve smiled. Calmly, gracefully, the way she always did. "I am sure the Duke is exactly where he needs to be." Her answer earned polite applause. The audience relaxed. Conversation resumed. The awkwardness faded. Outwardly, she handled the situation perfectly. Inwardly, something cracked. Not dramatically, not visibly, quietly, like ice finally giving way after years of pressure. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. More congratulations, more handshakes, more smiles. By the time she returned to Ravenshire Hall shortly before midnight, exhaustion settled deep in her bones. Mrs. Parker waited in the sitting room. One look at Genevieve's face told her everything. Someone said something. It was not a question. Genevieve removed her gloves slowly. Yes. What? Nothing important. Which means it was important. The maid folded her arms. Genevieve. For several moments she considered avoiding the conversation. Then she simply sat down. A woman made a joke. Mrs. Parker's expression hardened immediately. About His Grace? About me? Silence followed. Genevieve stared into the fire. Flames flickered softly across the room. Everyone felt sorry for me. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. Do you know what the worst part was? The maid waited. Genevieve smiled without humor. They were not wrong. Mrs. Parker crossed the room immediately. Do not do that. Do what? Turn someone else's cruelty into your own. Emotion tightened the older woman's voice. You deserve better than pity. Genevieve looked toward the fireplace. Perhaps. No. The answer came firmly. Not perhaps. Silence settled between them. Finally, Mrs. Parker spoke again. Tomorrow is your anniversary. The words landed heavily. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly. She had almost forgotten. Almost. 7 years. Exactly 7 years since she married Sebastian Wycliffe in a cathedral overflowing with flowers, expectations, and hope. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Their wedding reception. A quiet moment away from the crowd. Sebastian standing beside a library window while evening sunlight touched the room. There is something I can promise you. She had looked up then. Curious. Nervous. 22 years old and desperately trying to hide it. What is that? He hesitated. Even then, honesty came naturally to him. I cannot promise poetry. A faint smile touched his mouth. I cannot promise grand romantic gestures. She remembered laughing softly. That is a surprisingly specific list. I prefer accuracy. Then his expression grew serious. But I can promise loyalty. The memory sharpened. Every detail suddenly clear. And respect. He had held her gaze steadily. You will always have those. Genevieve remembered believing him completely, because he meant every word. There is one more thing, he had added. What? No matter where duty takes me, I will always be here on our anniversary. She opened her eyes. The fire crackled softly in the present. 7 years later, Mrs. Parker watched her carefully. What are you thinking? Genevieve looked toward the dark window overlooking Ravenshire. Somewhere beyond the night, London waited. Parliament waited. Responsibilities waited. As always, I was remembering a promise. The maid's expression softened immediately. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Then Genevieve rose. Calmly, deliberately, she crossed toward the writing desk, opened the locked drawer, removed the folded letter. This time she did not put it back. Mrs. Parker watched silently. Genevieve. She looked down at the page she had written 3 months earlier. The words remained unchanged. Her feelings no longer did, because tonight something had finally become clear. She was not leaving because Sebastian was cruel. She was leaving because she had spent 7 years making excuses for disappointments that never stopped arriving. She folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. Tomorrow is our anniversary. Her voice sounded surprisingly steady. And for the first time, I think I already know how it ends. Outside, midnight bells began ringing across the countryside. 7 slow chimes. 1 for every year she had waited. And somewhere deep inside her heart, hope quietly began letting go. The 7th wedding anniversary arrived beneath a sky the color of polished silver. Rain clouds drifted across the countryside during the early morning hours, casting soft shadows over Ravenshire's fields and gardens. Genevieve stood beside the breakfast room window watching droplets slide down the glass. 7 years. The number felt strangely unreal. Once she had imagined this anniversary very differently. There would have been flowers, perhaps a quiet dinner, a walk through the gardens. Nothing extravagant. She had never required extravagance. Only presence. Only effort. Only the reassurance that she mattered. A footman entered carrying the morning correspondence. Several letters. Estate reports. Invitations. Routine matters. Genevieve sorted through them quietly. Her hands paused when she reached the final envelope. London. The Duke's seal. For one brief moment, something dangerous stirred inside her chest. Hope. She hated how quickly it appeared. Hated even more how quickly she opened the letter. The message contained only a few lines. Formal. Polite. Sebastian apologized for his continued absence. Parliamentary negotiations had become unexpectedly complicated. He anticipated returning within several days. He regretted missing their anniversary. He hoped she would understand. Genevieve stared at the page, then folded it carefully. Once, twice, precisely. Mrs. Parker entered moments later carrying fresh tea. One glance at Genevieve's expression told her enough. Another apology? Genevieve nodded. The maid sighed heavily. I am running out of creative ways to dislike Parliament. Despite everything, Genevieve smiled faintly. That seems unfair. I am comfortable being unfair this morning. She placed the tea service on the table. Especially today. Silence settled briefly. Finally, Genevieve folded the letter and set it aside. It changes nothing. The statement surprised her by sounding true. Several months ago, the apology would have devastated her. Several weeks ago, it would have hurt. Today, it merely confirmed something she already knew. Around noon, Ravenshire hosted a local agricultural exhibition on the eastern grounds. The event had been planned long before the anniversary became significant. Farmers displayed livestock. Craftsmen presented their work. School children competed in educational contests. Families gathered from surrounding villages. As Duchess, Genevieve was expected to attend. Normally, Sebastian accompanied her. Today she arrived alone. Carriages lined the entrance road. Colorful tents stretched across open fields. The atmosphere felt cheerful despite the weather. Villagers greeted her warmly wherever she walked. Children waved enthusiastically. Elderly couples stopped to chat. Farmers proudly introduced prize-winning animals. For a time, Genevieve genuinely enjoyed herself. These people mattered to her. Their lives mattered. Their successes mattered. Near the center of the exhibition grounds, a crowd gathered around one of the larger display tents. Curious, Genevieve moved closer. A local historical society had organized an exhibit celebrating prominent families throughout the region. Paintings, documents, photographs, generations of county history displayed beneath canvas walls. She entered quietly. Several visitors immediately stepped aside to allow her passage. Then she noticed the gathering near the far wall. Lady Victoria Pembroke stood surrounded by admirers. Beautiful, elegant, and effortlessly charming, Victoria represented exactly the sort of woman society adored. She was also Sebastian's distant cousin. Genevieve liked her well enough. Unfortunately, society preferred inventing stories. Victoria noticed her immediately. Genevieve. Genuine warmth lit her expression. There you are. The younger woman crossed the room and embraced her lightly. Happy anniversary. The simple kindness almost hurt. Thank you. Victoria lowered her voice. Have you heard from Sebastian? Genevieve managed to smile. This morning. Understanding immediately crossed Victoria's face. She was too intelligent not to recognize what that meant. Before either woman could continue, another guest approached. Lady Victoria. The woman beamed brightly. I was just telling everyone how fortunate the Duke is. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? The guest laughed. The two of you have always looked so well suited. Silence fell instantly. Heavy. Awkward. Unmistakable. The woman realized her mistake too late. Several nearby guests exchanged horrified glances. Victoria froze. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. For one unbearable second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Victoria recovered first. The Duke is married. Her voice remained perfectly calm. To the Duchess standing beside me. The woman flushed crimson. Of course. I did not mean. She stopped, because everyone knew exactly what she meant. The damage was already done. Sympathy spread through the room like smoke. Genevieve recognized it immediately. The pitying looks, the embarrassment, the unspoken understanding. Everyone knew Sebastian was absent again. Everyone knew society whispered about it. And now, apparently, some people forgot who his wife actually was. Victoria's expression hardened. Perhaps introductions are necessary. The edge in her voice surprised everyone. Because I assure you there is no confusion regarding who belongs at Ravenshire. The woman murmured another apology and retreated quickly. Conversation gradually resumed. Yet the moment remained, hanging in the air, refusing to disappear. Victoria turned toward Genevieve. Genuine concern filled her eyes. I am so sorry. Genevieve smiled. Years of practice made the gesture effortless. There is nothing to apologize for. There absolutely is. You did nothing wrong. Victoria hesitated, then touched her arm gently. You deserve better than this. The words landed harder than the insult itself. Because Victoria meant them. Because she was right. Genevieve excused herself shortly afterward and stepped outside. Cool air greeted her immediately. She crossed toward a quieter section of the exhibition grounds where fewer visitors wandered. The distant sounds of music and conversation faded behind her. For several moments she simply stood beneath a large oak tree watching clouds drift overhead. May I say something? The voice came from nearby. Genevieve turned. Nathaniel Blackwood stood several feet away holding a folded program. He looked as though he had witnessed at least part of the earlier scene. Embarrassment touched her briefly, then vanished. She found she no longer possessed the energy for embarrassment. You may. Nathaniel approached carefully. Not too close. Never imposing. The woman inside was an idiot. A startled laugh escaped her before she could stop it. That is remarkably direct. I am occasionally capable of honesty. His expression softened. Especially when politeness would be dishonest. Genevieve looked away. Across the field, children chased one another between display tents. Their laughter carried on the breeze. Simple happiness. Uncomplicated happiness. It seemed impossibly distant. Nathaniel waited several moments before speaking again. You handled it well. I handled it. No. He shook his head. You handled it with grace. Genevieve smiled sadly. Grace is often just another word for endurance. The observation surprised him. She saw it immediately. Then slowly understanding appeared. That sounds exhausting. Her eyes met his. Sometimes it is. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Not the empty kind she knew too well. Nathaniel looked toward the exhibition grounds. For what it is worth, most people here admire you. Genevieve almost laughed. That did not seem obvious a few minutes ago. One foolish comment does not erase years of respect. He paused. Or affection. Something about the sincerity in his voice unsettled her. Not because it was unwelcome, because it felt unfamiliar. Being seen always felt unfamiliar these days. Before she could respond, a group of school children rushed toward her carrying ribbons from an educational competition. Excited voices immediately filled the space. Nathaniel stepped aside with a faint smile while Genevieve congratulated winners and admired projects. The interruption lasted several minutes. By the time the children departed, he was preparing to leave. I should not keep you. You are not keeping me. Nevertheless, Nathaniel inclined his head politely, then hesitated. Happy anniversary, Genevieve. Her name, not Duchess, not Your Grace, simply Genevieve. The sound lingered unexpectedly after he walked away. Late that afternoon, rain finally arrived, gentle at first, then steady. By evening, Ravenshire Hall glowed warmly against the storm. Firelight flickered through tall windows. Servants moved quietly through corridors. The estate felt peaceful. Genevieve should have felt peaceful too. Instead, she found herself sitting alone in the formal dining room. A table prepared for two stretched before her. Crystal glasses, fine china, candles burning softly. An anniversary dinner arranged weeks earlier. One place occupied. One place empty. The sight no longer surprised her. Somehow that realization hurt most of all. Mrs. Parker appeared in the doorway. You do not have to stay here. Genevieve looked toward the vacant chair. I know. You could eat in the sitting room. I could. Or not eat at all. Genevieve smiled faintly. That sounds unhealthy. The maid folded her arms. So does this. Silence followed. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere deep within the house, a clock marked the passing hour. Finally Genevieve rose from her chair. Not dramatically, not angrily, simply decisively. Have the meal sent to the staff dining room. Mrs. Parker blinked. What? The entire meal? A small smile touched Genevieve's lips. Someone should enjoy it. The maid stared. Then slowly she smiled too. I think that is an excellent idea. Together they left the dining room behind. Neither looked back. Later that evening, after the house had grown quiet, Genevieve returned to her sitting room. Rain continued falling outside. The fire burned low. She crossed toward the writing desk and opened the locked drawer once more. The letter remained where she left it. Waiting, patient, certain. For several moments she simply stared at it. Then she sat down and reached for fresh paper. Not to rewrite the letter. To add something. One final sentence. Her pen moved steadily across the page. When she finished, she read the words once. Then folded the letter carefully. This time her hands did not shake. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the countryside. Inside, Genevieve extinguished the lamp and stood. The anniversary was over. The promises were over. The waiting was almost over too. What she did not know was that hundreds of miles away in London, Sebastian Wickliffe was staring at a train schedule while arguing with government officials and preparing to abandon an important negotiation. Because for the first time in 7 years, something felt wrong. He could not explain it, could not define it, yet the feeling refused to leave. And before the night ended, the Duke of Ravenshire would make a decision that arrived far too late to prevent the damage already done. Sebastian Wickliffe arrived at Ravenshire Hall just after sunrise. The journey from London had taken most of the night. Mud splattered the wheels of his carriage. Exhaustion weighed heavily behind his eyes. Yet the moment the estate came into view, he felt certain the decision to leave London had been correct. He could not explain why. The feeling had begun shortly after midnight and refused to disappear. Something felt wrong. Not politically wrong. Not financially wrong. Personally wrong. The realization had unsettled him enough to abandon meetings that ordinarily would have consumed another 3 days. A footman opened the carriage door immediately. "Your Grace." Sebastian stepped onto the gravel drive. The spring air felt cool against his face. "Good morning." The servant hesitated. "We did not expect you until next week." "Neither did Parliament." The answer earned a nervous smile. Sebastian crossed the entrance hall without slowing. The familiar house greeted him with quiet morning sounds. Servants beginning their duties. Clocks marking the hour. Distant footsteps echoing through corridors. Home. Yet instead of relief, a strange unease continued tightening inside his chest. Mr. Holloway appeared moments later. "Your Grace." "Where is her Grace?" The butler blinked. "She is in the West Gardens." Sebastian frowned slightly. "At this hour?" "She has been spending considerable time there recently." Something about the answer unsettled him further. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, he found her near the rose gardens overlooking the lake. Morning sunlight touched the landscape with pale gold. Fresh spring blooms lined stone pathways. Birds moved through the trees. Everything appeared peaceful. Genevieve stood beside a flower bed speaking with Mr. Bennet, the head gardener. She looked up as Sebastian approached. Surprise crossed her face immediately. Not delight, not excitement, simply surprise. The distinction bothered him more than it should have. Mr. Bennet noticed him a second later and straightened. "Your Grace." Sebastian nodded. "Good morning." The gardener glanced between husband and wife, then wisely excused himself. Silence followed. Genevieve remained where she stood, calm, composed, beautiful in a simple pale blue dress. Sebastian realized suddenly that he could not remember the last time he had simply looked at her. The thought arrived unexpectedly. So did the guilt that followed. "I returned early." The statement sounded inadequate the moment it left his mouth. "I noticed." Her smile was polite. Nothing more. 7 years ago she would have crossed the distance between them immediately. 7 years ago her eyes would have lit with genuine happiness. Now she merely waited. The realization landed quietly. Yet it landed. Sebastian cleared his throat. "I received your note about the agricultural exhibition. It went well. I am sorry I missed it." "I know." Again that polite smile. Again the uncomfortable feeling that something important had shifted while he was away. They began walking slowly through the gardens. For a time neither spoke. Eventually Sebastian glanced toward her. "How was the anniversary?" The question sounded ridiculous. Even he recognized it. Genevieve looked ahead. "Quiet. I regret being absent." "You sent a letter." He frowned slightly. That is not the same thing. The answer surprised both of them. Genevieve glanced toward him briefly, then looked away again. For reasons he could not explain, the reaction made him oddly restless. The negotiations became more complicated than expected. I assumed as much. The situation involved 3 trade agreements. Of course. Every response sounded reasonable. Every response sounded distant. Sebastian suddenly found himself missing something he had never consciously valued before. Her warmth, her enthusiasm, her effortless willingness to meet him halfway. When had that disappeared? They reached the lake and stopped. Sunlight danced across the water. Several ducks drifted lazily near the shoreline. The setting should have felt peaceful. Instead, Sebastian felt increasingly uncomfortable. Genevieve. She turned toward him. Yes. He searched for the right words, struggled unexpectedly to find them. I know I have been absent more often than I should. Her expression remained calm. You have responsibilities. That is not an excuse. The answer surprised him. It appeared to surprise her as well. Silence followed. Then Genevieve smiled softly. Not bitterly. Not cruelly. Almost sadly. No, it is not. The conversation should have continued. Instead, a servant appeared running across the lawn carrying a stack of correspondence. Business interrupted once again. By the time Sebastian finished reviewing urgent documents, Genevieve had disappeared. The remainder of the morning unfolded much the same way. Estate matters demanded attention. Tenant concerns required decisions. Financial reports awaited review. Responsibilities accumulated quickly after a prolonged absence. Yet through it all, Sebastian found himself distracted. Not by politics, by Genevieve. The realization felt unfamiliar. Around noon, he entered the library searching for a land survey. Instead, he discovered several framed photographs arranged atop a side table. The images had always been there. He simply had never examined them closely. One showed Genevieve surrounded by schoolchildren outside the village academy. Another captured a charity event from several years earlier. A third displayed the opening of a community medical clinic. In every photograph, people looked toward her, smiled at her, gathered around her. Sebastian stared at the images longer than necessary. Then Mr. Holloway entered carrying additional correspondence. Your Grace. Sebastian looked up. Yes. The butler hesitated. There is one matter requiring your immediate attention. Go on. The community recognition ceremony this evening. Confusion crossed his face. What ceremony? Holloway appeared surprised. For Her Grace. Silence followed. For Genevieve? Yes, Your Grace. The butler adjusted the papers in his hands. The county council is presenting an award for her contributions to local education and public welfare. Sebastian stared. Tonight? Yes. I was not informed. Another pause. Holloway's expression grew carefully neutral. The arrangements were finalized several months ago. Several months. Sebastian felt a sudden tightening in his chest. Genevieve knew about this? Of course. And she said nothing? Holloway appeared to choose his next words carefully. Her Grace rarely discusses her accomplishments. The answer lingered long after the butler left. Several months. A major public recognition. An award involving local leaders from across the county. And somehow Sebastian had never heard about it. The realization bothered him more than he expected. By late afternoon, preparations for the ceremony filled much of Ravenshire's eastern grounds. Guests arrived steadily. Local officials mingled with educators, charity directors, and community leaders. Rows of white chairs stretched across the lawn overlooking the gardens. A small platform stood near the front. Flower arrangements decorated every available space. The atmosphere felt celebratory. Sebastian arrived early, determined not to miss this event. Not again. For the first time in years, he ignored several pending reports and chose something else first. The decision felt strangely satisfying. As guests continued arriving, he noticed a recurring pattern. Everywhere he turned, people spoke about Genevieve. Not politely, not out of obligation, with genuine admiration. The scholarship program changed hundreds of lives. She personally funded winter relief efforts. The school expansion never would have happened without her. Story after story emerged. Sebastian listened quietly. Some details surprised him. Others shocked him entirely. Had she really done all this? Eventually, the ceremony began. Local officials delivered speeches. Teachers shared testimonials. Community leaders discussed various projects. Genevieve sat near the front beside several schoolchildren. Every time someone praised her, she looked vaguely uncomfortable. The reaction made him smile despite himself. Then came the final presentation. The chairman of the county council stepped forward carrying an engraved plaque. Applause filled the lawn. This recognition honors years of service. More applause followed. The chairman smiled warmly. And there is no individual more deserving. He turned toward Genevieve. Please join us. She rose, graceful as always, dignified as always. Sebastian felt unexpectedly proud watching her cross the platform. Then everything changed. A messenger appeared suddenly at the edge of the gathering. Breathless, urgent. Several council members immediately moved toward him. Concern spread across their faces. Whispered conversations followed. Confusion rippled through the audience. The chairman's expression shifted dramatically. Moments later, he approached the platform again. Regret filled his features. Ladies and gentlemen. Silence settled over the crowd. I must apologize. Genevieve frowned slightly. The chairman looked genuinely distressed. A bridge collapse has been reported in Eastbridge County. Gasps sounded throughout the audience. Several emergency meetings require the immediate presence of council leadership. More murmurs followed. The chairman swallowed. Unfortunately, we must postpone the remainder of today's ceremony. Complete silence followed. Sebastian felt his stomach drop. Not because of the emergency. Emergencies happened. Because he saw Genevieve's face. Just for a second. One brief second before composure returned. Disappointment. Not dramatic. Not visible to most people. Yet unmistakable. 7 years of experience had taught her how to hide pain. Apparently, it had finally taught him how to recognize it. Apologies spread quickly through the gathering. Guests expressed sympathy. Officials hurried away. Within minutes, the celebration began dissolving. People departed. Chairs emptied. Conversations ended. The award remained undelivered. The recognition remained unfinished. Another important moment interrupted. Another promise of appreciation delayed. Sebastian watched Genevieve thank people for attending. Watched her reassure embarrassed organizers. Watched her smile through disappointment she would never admit existed. Suddenly something became painfully clear. The universe itself seemed determined to treat her the same way he had. As though her contributions could always wait. As though there would always be another opportunity. Another day. Another ceremony. Another chance. He crossed the lawn toward her. Determination building with every step. Genevieve turned as he approached. It is unfortunate, she said softly. But emergencies happen. Sebastian stared at her. Then at the half-empty grounds. Then back at her again. No. The word emerged before he could stop it. Genevieve blinked. What? For the first time in years, frustration entered his voice. Not directed at her. Something else. Perhaps himself. It is not unfortunate. He looked around the abandoned ceremony. It is unfair. Surprise crossed her face. Genuine surprise. Sebastian realized then that she expected disappointment. Expected sacrifice. Expected important moments to disappear. The realization hit harder than any political defeat he had ever experienced. Because she was right to expect it. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet voice whispered a truth he was not yet ready to face. If Genevieve ever decided she had endured enough disappointment for one lifetime, he would have absolutely no argument against her leaving. The evening after the cancelled ceremony settled over Ravenshire Hall with unusual quiet. Rain had returned shortly before sunset. Soft droplets tapped against tall windows. Firelight flickered across polished wood panels. Servants moved through the corridors with the careful discretion that seemed to define old houses and older traditions. Yet beneath the calm surface of the estate, something had changed. Sebastian felt it. Genevieve felt it. Neither had found the words for it yet. Dinner passed with minimal conversation. They sat across from one another beneath crystal chandeliers while silverware glinted in candlelight. The meal was excellent. The silence was not. Several times Sebastian considered speaking. Several times he stopped himself. He was not a man who struggled with language. Parliament had taught him how to argue. Negotiations had taught him how to persuade. Responsibility had taught him how to command. Yet somehow he found himself incapable of discussing the one subject that mattered. Genevieve. The realization irritated him. More importantly, it unsettled him. Eventually the meal ended. Genevieve rose first. "Good night, Sebastian." He looked up. "It is still early." A faint smile touched her lips. "That has never stopped us before." The answer landed harder than she intended. He saw it immediately. So did she. Silence followed. Then Genevieve inclined her head politely and left the room. Sebastian remained seated long after she disappeared. Several minutes later, he found himself standing outside the library instead of reviewing reports in his office. The decision seemed almost accidental. Yet he entered anyway. Firelight glowed softly across shelves lined with books. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Genevieve sat near one of the windows reading correspondence. A small lamp illuminated the space around her. She looked comfortable here, at home here. Sebastian realized with a strange sense of guilt that she always looked more at ease when he was not present. "Am I interrupting?" She glanced up. Surprise flickered briefly across her features. "No." He crossed toward the fireplace. Neither spoke for several moments. The quiet felt different tonight. More fragile somehow. Finally Sebastian looked toward her. "I am sorry about today." Genevieve lowered the letter in her hands. "The bridge collapse was hardly your fault." "That is not what I meant." Another pause followed. He searched for the right words. "The ceremony should have happened. Perhaps it will happen later. Perhaps." Yet neither sounded convinced. Genevieve folded the letter carefully and placed it aside. "You seem unusually troubled by this." The observation was accurate. Sebastian sat opposite her. "Should I not be?" She considered the question. "Most people would have already moved on." "You are not most people." The answer arrived before he could stop it. For some reason, her eyes widened slightly. He could not understand why. The statement seemed obvious. Genevieve looked away first. "Neither are you." Silence settled once more. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the countryside. Sebastian watched the fire for a moment, then made a decision. "I have been thinking about the anniversary." A shadow crossed her expression. Brief but unmistakable. "Have you?" "Yes." She waited. When he failed to continue immediately, she offered a small smile. "That sounds dangerous." Despite himself, he almost smiled back. "Possibly." Another pause. "I know I missed it." Genevieve's gaze returned to him. Calm. Steady. "Yes. I know I have missed others." "Yes." The second answer sounded softer. Somehow that made it worse. Sebastian leaned back slightly. Frustration crept into his thoughts. Not frustration toward her. Toward himself. He had entered the room intending to repair something. Yet every sentence seemed inadequate. Every apology seemed years too late. Finally he said the only thing he knew for certain. "You deserved better." Genevieve stared at him. The room fell completely silent. For a moment he thought she might argue. Instead she nodded once. Slowly. "I did." The honesty stunned him. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Genevieve stood. She crossed toward the writing desk near the far wall. Sebastian watched her absently until she opened a drawer. Something shifted in her posture. Small. Almost imperceptible. Yet enough to catch his attention. She removed a folded letter. Cream-colored paper. Carefully preserved. Then she turned back toward him. For the first time all evening, nervousness appeared in her expression. "There is something I need to tell you." Instinctively, Sebastian sat straighter. "All right." Genevieve remained standing. The letter rested quietly in her hands. "I wrote this 3 months ago." Confusion crossed his face. "What is it?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper, then relaxed. "A decision." The answer made no sense. Yet a strange feeling immediately settled in his chest. Unpleasant. Cold. He could not explain why. Genevieve took a breath. Then another. When she finally spoke, her voice remained remarkably calm. I am leaving Ravenshire. The words landed like a physical blow. Sebastian stared at her, certain he had misunderstood. What? I am leaving. She held his gaze steadily. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But soon. The room seemed suddenly smaller. The fire quieter. The air heavier. Leaving. He repeated the word because it was the only one his mind could process. Yes. Why? The question escaped immediately. Genevieve blinked. Not because the answer surprised her. Because the question did. You truly do not know? Sebastian rose from his chair. Genevieve. His voice sounded unfamiliar to his own ears. Tight. Strained. I knew you were unhappy. I did not know. He stopped, because he had no idea how to finish the sentence. Genevieve helped him. You did not know it had become unbearable. The honesty hurt. More than it should have. More than he expected. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair. Why now? A faint sadness touched her expression. That is the wrong question. Then what is the right one? Why not years ago? Silence followed. Heavy silence. Genevieve looked down briefly, then back up. I stayed because I believed things would eventually change. Her voice remained gentle. I stayed because I respected you. Another breath. I stayed because I loved you. Sebastian froze. Completely. She had never said those words before. Not once in 7 years. Not directly. Not like this. Yet before he could respond, she continued. But eventually love becomes waiting. Pain flickered across her face. And waiting becomes loneliness. The fire crackled softly behind them. Neither noticed. I do not blame you, she said. That is what makes this difficult. Sebastian stared at her. Genevieve. You are not cruel. Her eyes glistened faintly. You are not selfish. Then why are you leaving? The question sounded almost desperate. He hated that. Hated the feeling behind it even more. Genevieve smiled sadly. Because good intentions are not the same thing as being loved. The words struck with brutal precision. Every missed anniversary. Every empty chair. Every postponed conversation. Every disappointment. Suddenly they stood together in one unavoidable truth. Sebastian felt something unfamiliar twisting inside his chest. Fear. Real fear. Not political fear. Not financial fear. Personal fear. The kind he had spent most of his life avoiding. What do you want me to do? The question emerged quietly. Genevieve looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. Nothing. Nothing. I am not asking for anything anymore. The answer somehow felt worse, because it sounded final. Sebastian moved toward the window. Thoughts collided chaotically inside his mind. Leave. She was leaving. The words refused to fit inside reality. Ravenshire without Genevieve made no sense. The estate itself seemed built around her presence. The schools, the charities, the gardens, the traditions, the people. Even this room felt shaped by her. Yet standing here now, he realized something deeply unsettling. He had never actually asked whether she was happy. Not once. Finally, he turned back toward her. If leaving is what you want. The sentence felt wrong before it ended. Yet he continued anyway, because logic had always guided him. Then I will make sure you are comfortable. Genevieve's expression changed. Very slightly, yet enough. Comfortable. You will have a house of your choosing. He spoke carefully, methodically. Financial independence. Staff. Security. Whatever you require. Even as the words left his mouth, something felt terribly off. Genevieve simply listened. You will want for nothing, he finished. Silence followed. Long, painful silence. Then she laughed softly. Not because anything was amusing, because disappointment had finally exhausted itself. Of course. Sebastian frowned. What? Genevieve looked down at the letter in her hands, then back at him. Tears shimmered briefly in her eyes, though none fell. You still do not understand. Frustration touched his voice. Then help me understand. She stared at him for several seconds. Finally she nodded. Once. slowly, as though accepting something she had resisted for years. No. The answer stunned him. No. Genevieve folded the letter carefully. I spent 7 years explaining what I needed. Her smile was heartbreakingly gentle. I do not think I have the strength for an eighth. Sebastian opened his mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he genuinely did not know what to say. The realization terrified him. Genevieve crossed the room and returned the letter to the drawer. When she spoke again, her voice sounded calm, peaceful even. Thank you for offering me freedom. She looked at him one final time. I hope one day you understand why that was never what I wanted. Then she left the library. The door closed softly behind her. No shouting, no accusations, no anger, only quiet finality. Sebastian remained alone beside the fire, motionless, confused, disturbed. Somewhere deep inside him, a realization began taking shape. Slow, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. He had just been handed the most important truth of his life, and he had answered it exactly the wrong way. Sebastian did not sleep. Long after midnight, the library remained illuminated while the rest of Ravenshire Hall disappeared into darkness. Reports sat untouched across his desk. Letters remained unopened. A half-finished glass of whiskey stood forgotten beside the fireplace. None of it mattered. Only one sentence continued echoing through his thoughts. I am leaving Ravenshire. He had repeated the words so many times that they no longer sounded real. Yet reality remained stubborn. Genevieve was leaving, not threatening, not arguing, not demanding change. Leaving. The distinction disturbed him in ways he could not fully explain. He understood conflict. Conflict could be solved, negotiated, managed. What unsettled him was her calmness, the certainty in her voice, the complete absence of expectation. She no longer seemed to want anything from him. Somehow that frightened him more than anger ever could. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, he finally abandoned the library and wandered through the silent hallways. Ravenshire had always felt familiar, predictable. Tonight it felt different, as though he were seeing it for the first time. Portraits lined the corridors. Ancestors watched from gilded frames. Generations of Wycliffes who had managed estates, negotiated treaties, and carried responsibilities. Sebastian normally found comfort in that continuity. Not tonight. Tonight he found himself stopping outside a music room he rarely entered. The door stood slightly open. Curiosity pulled him inside. Moonlight spilled through tall windows. A grand piano occupied the center of the room. Sheet music rested neatly on a nearby stand. Sebastian frowned. He had forgotten this room existed. More accurately, he had forgotten how often Genevieve used it. Several pieces of music lay arranged on a side table. Educational compositions, student exercises, children's recital programs. He picked one up. The date caught his attention immediately. 3 years earlier. Another program sat beneath it. Then another. 5 years. 4 years. 6 years. Event after event. Concert after concert. Performances. Scholarships. Fundraisers. Entire sections of her life preserved inside a room he almost never entered. Sebastian lowered the papers slowly. A strange feeling settled inside him. Not guilt exactly. Something deeper. The uncomfortable realization that his wife possessed an entire world he barely understood. Morning arrived gray and quiet. At breakfast, Genevieve appeared exactly on time. As though nothing had happened. As though she had not informed her husband of her departure only hours earlier. Sebastian watched her carefully as she poured tea. Every movement seemed calm, controlled, deliberate. She wore a pale cream dress. Her hair was arranged simply. She looked peaceful. The sight made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Did you sleep? The question escaped before he could stop it. Genevieve glanced up. A little. I did not. She blinked. Surprise flickered briefly across her features, then vanished. I am sorry to hear that. The response sounded polite, respectful, distant. Sebastian stared at his untouched breakfast. He suddenly hated distance. The realization startled him. For years he had practically built his life around it. Distance made duty easier. Distance prevented distraction. Distance kept emotions manageable. Now he found himself wanting the opposite. Unfortunately, he had no idea how to achieve it. The meal continued in uncomfortable silence. Eventually Genevieve set down her teacup. I will be visiting the village school this afternoon. Sebastian looked up immediately. The school? Yes. May I come? The question surprised both of them. Genevieve stared for a moment. You dislike school inspections. I do not dislike them. You once called them 6 hours of administrative suffering. Despite himself, Sebastian almost smiled. That was taken out of context. You said it directly to the headmaster. A faint smile touched her lips. The sight affected him more than it should have. Even so, Genevieve studied him carefully, then nodded once. If you wish. The village school stood less than a mile from Ravenshire Hall. By early afternoon, sunlight had finally broken through the clouds. Children filled classrooms with energy that seemed entirely incompatible with orderly education. Teachers guided lessons. Chalk dust drifted through warm air. Laughter echoed from distant rooms. Genevieve moved through the building with easy familiarity. Every teacher greeted her warmly. Every student seemed delighted to see her. Sebastian followed quietly behind, increasingly aware that he occupied unfamiliar territory. A young boy spotted Genevieve near one classroom door and immediately ran toward her carrying a drawing. Look what I made. Genevieve crouched slightly to examine it. This is wonderful, Thomas. The child's face lit up. Really? Absolutely. She pointed toward a carefully colored section. I especially like the trees. Thomas grinned proudly, then noticed Sebastian standing nearby. His eyes widened. Are you the Duke? Sebastian nodded. I am. The boy considered this seriously, then asked, Do you work for the Duchess? Silence followed. Several teachers froze. Genevieve covered her mouth. Sebastian stared. Thomas waited patiently. Finally Genevieve laughed. Real laughter. Bright laughter. The sound filled the hallway. Not exactly. The boy looked confused. Because everyone says she runs everything. More laughter followed. Even Sebastian found himself smiling. Many people seemed to believe that. Thomas accepted the answer and ran off. Yet the moment lingered. Because beneath the innocence, there was truth. Everywhere they went that afternoon, people spoke about Genevieve's projects, her programs, her initiatives, her work. Sebastian listened. More importantly, he noticed something else. Every conversation carried affection. Genuine affection. Not because she held a title, because she earned it. By the time they returned to Ravenshire, late afternoon sunlight painted the estate in gold. For several moments neither spoke during the carriage ride home. Then Sebastian broke the silence. They love you. Genevieve looked out the window. The children. Everyone. Her expression softened slightly. I love them too. The answer seemed simple, yet something about it stayed with him. Later that evening, Sebastian found himself wandering through the West Wing, searching for a document Mr. Holloway claimed was stored in the archives. Instead, he discovered a room he had not entered in years. The old estate planning office. Shelves lined the walls. Filing cabinets occupied every corner. Records stretching back decades filled the space. Dust covered most surfaces. Yet one section appeared recently organized. Curious, he approached. Several binders rested on a large table. Community development projects, educational programs, agricultural relief, medical outreach, all bearing Genevieve's handwriting. Sebastian opened the nearest binder. Financial summaries filled the pages. Budgets, allocations, donations, grant distributions. The sheer volume stunned him. He turned another page, then another, and suddenly stopped. A notation near the bottom of a report caught his eye. Supplemental funding source. Anonymous private contribution. Amount, $25,000. Sebastian frowned. $25,000 represented a substantial sum, especially several years earlier. He continued reading. Similar entries appeared repeatedly. Anonymous contributions. Anonymous transfers. Anonymous financial support. Every time a project faced shortfalls, mysterious funding appeared. No donor identified. No explanation provided. Strange. Very strange. A sound behind him interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Langley stood in the doorway. The estate's longtime financial advisor looked startled to find him there. Your Grace. Sebastian held up one of the reports. Who made these contributions? Langley's expression changed immediately. Too quickly. Too noticeably. Sebastian saw it. I beg your pardon? The anonymous funding. He pointed toward the page. Who provided it? Langley remained silent, just long enough to create suspicion. Then he adjusted his glasses. Various sources. Sebastian narrowed his eyes. That is not an answer. Another pause followed. Longer this time. Finally Langley looked away. Some matters were considered private. Sebastian felt a strange tension building. Private to whom? The advisor hesitated, then spoke carefully. Not mine to discuss. Silence filled the room. Sebastian stared at him. Years of political experience had taught him how to recognize avoidance. Langley was hiding something. More importantly, he was hiding it deliberately. Who authorized the secrecy? Langley met his gaze. Respectfully. Firmly. Her Grace. The answer landed unexpectedly. Sebastian looked back at the financial reports. Anonymous contributions. Repeated over multiple years. Significant amounts. Always appearing exactly when projects required assistance. Questions began forming rapidly. Questions he had never thought to ask before. How much money are we discussing? Langley smiled faintly. Not amused. Almost sympathetic. More than you realize, Your Grace. Then, before Sebastian could ask another question, the advisor excused himself and left. The door closed softly behind him. Sebastian remained alone among decades of estate records. Sunlight faded slowly beyond the windows. Shadows stretched across the room. Yet he barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the report spread before him. For years he believed he understood Ravenshire. Believed he understood how the estate functioned. Believed he understood the woman he married. Now uncertainty had entered all three assumptions. And for the first time since Genevieve announced her departure, another emotion joined the fear already growing inside him. Curiosity. Because somewhere inside those records lay a story he had never been told. A story everyone else seemed to know except him. And as evening darkness settled across Ravenshire Hall, Sebastian realized something both troubling and impossible to ignore. The more he learned about Genevieve, the less he understood how he had ever managed not to see her. The next morning began with questions. Sebastian carried them into breakfast, into meetings, into estate reports. They followed him through every hour like shadows he could not escape. Anonymous contributions, hidden funding, Genevieve's decision to leave. None of it fit together. For years he believed he understood the structure of his life. Duty, responsibility, predictability. Now every certainty seemed less certain. Across the breakfast table, Genevieve appeared calm. She discussed routine estate matters, reviewed correspondence, asked about tenant concerns in the Northern District. Nothing in her behavior suggested she had recently shattered the foundations of his world. Sebastian found the contrast deeply unsettling. Finally, he set aside a financial report. I spoke with Langley yesterday. Genevieve looked up briefly. Did you? Yes. She returned her attention to her tea. How is he? The casual response nearly made him laugh. Avoiding my questions. A faint smile appeared. He has always been talented at that. Sebastian watched her carefully. Apparently he learned from someone. Her hand paused slightly against the teacup. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for him. I have no idea what you mean. Anonymous funding. He spoke quietly. Community projects. School programs. Relief efforts. Silence settled between them. Genevieve did not look surprised. That fact alone answered several questions. Those records were not intended to attract attention. Whose attention? Her gaze lifted. Calm. Steady. Anyone's. Sebastian stared at her. Why? For a moment she seemed to consider the question seriously. Because helping people is not supposed to be a performance. The answer should have satisfied him. Instead it only created more questions. Before he could continue, Genevieve rose from her chair. I have meetings this morning. Genevieve. She paused. Yes. He wanted to ask 100 things. Instead, he said the only one that mattered. How much do I not know? Something changed in her expression. Sadness, perhaps. Or resignation. More than you think. Then she left. The answer stayed with him for the rest of the day. By noon, Sebastian found himself standing outside the village medical clinic. The building sat near the center of Ravenshire's largest village. Brick walls, white trim, flower boxes beneath every window. Simple, functional, familiar. Yet as he entered, a realization struck him. He had never actually visited. Not once. The physician greeted him warmly. Your Grace. Sebastian shook his hand. Dr. Reeves. The older man smiled. What brings you here? Sebastian looked around the waiting room. Families occupied several chairs. Children colored quietly at a small table. Everything felt welcoming, comfortable. I wanted to learn more about the clinic. Dr. Reeves appeared surprised, then pleased. Of course. They spent nearly an hour touring the facility. Treatment rooms, community programs, preventive care services. Everywhere Sebastian went, Genevieve's name appeared. A scholarship fund, medical equipment donations, outreach initiatives. Eventually they entered a modest office overlooking the garden. Dr. Reeves opened a filing cabinet while searching for a document. Several framed photographs rested atop the cabinet. Sebastian's attention immediately settled on one. Genevieve stood surrounded by nurses and volunteers during the clinic's opening ceremony. She looked younger, happier, proud. When was this taken? Dr. Reeves followed his gaze. 6 years ago. 6. The clinic opened shortly after the flooding crisis. Sebastian frowned. I remember the flooding. Then you remember how many families struggled afterward. The physician smiled warmly. Her Grace certainly does. A strange feeling touched Sebastian's chest. What do you mean? Dr. Reeves looked genuinely surprised by the question. The clinic almost never happened. Silence followed. Why? Funding. The physician leaned back in his chair. We had plans, support, volunteers. He shook his head. What we lacked was money. Sebastian felt his pulse shift slightly. Then how was it built? Dr. Reeves laughed softly. The same way half the county's projects were built. He pointed toward the photograph. Her Grace. Sebastian said nothing. Dr. Reeves continued. She convinced donors, organized fundraising, covered shortages. Pause followed. She never wanted public credit. Another pause, which always seemed ridiculous to me. Sebastian stared at the photograph. Genevieve smiling beside a building he had never bothered to visit. A building that existed because of her. Hours later, another piece of the puzzle emerged. This time at the village academy. Sebastian arrived intending only a brief visit. Instead, he spent most of the afternoon speaking with teachers. The headmaster proudly displayed recent improvements. Expanded classrooms, updated materials, scholarship programs. The pattern repeated itself. Genevieve, 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 everywhere. Finally, Sebastian stopped beside a display case containing photographs from previous years. One image caught his attention immediately. A ribbon-cutting ceremony. Children cheering. Genevieve standing near the center. Beside her stood Nathaniel Blackwood. The sight produced an unexpected reaction. Irritation. Small. Immediate. Unwelcome. Sebastian frowned at himself. Ridiculous. Nathaniel was a respected landowner. A charitable supporter. Nothing more. Yet he continued staring at the photograph longer than necessary. Lord Blackwood helped considerably, the headmaster explained, especially during the expansion project. Sebastian forced his attention elsewhere. Did he? Indeed. The headmaster smiled. Though not nearly as much as Her Grace. Another familiar answer. Another reminder of how much he had missed. On his way back to Ravenshire Hall, Sebastian ordered the carriage stopped beside a small community center near the river. Construction workers occupied the site. Several additions were underway. Curious, he approached the foreman. 10 minutes later, he learned Genevieve had personally organized the project. 3 years earlier, while he attended trade negotiations abroad. Another project. Another contribution. Another story he never knew. By the time evening arrived, exhaustion settled heavily across his shoulders. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The exhaustion of confronting truth. Ravenshire Hall glowed warmly against the twilight sky as he returned home. Inside, he found Mr. Holloway supervising preparations for dinner. Your Grace. Sebastian removed his gloves slowly. How long has everyone known? The butler blinked. Known what? Everything. Frustration entered his voice despite his efforts. The schools, the clinic, the programs, the funding. Understanding appeared immediately. Holloway's expression softened. A very long time. Sebastian laughed once. The sound carried no humor. Except me. Holloway remained respectfully silent, which, unfortunately, felt like confirmation. Later that evening, Sebastian entered the library expecting solitude. Instead, he found Eleanor Fairmont seated near the fireplace. Genevieve's oldest friend looked perfectly comfortable occupying his favorite chair, a circumstance that would normally irritate him. Tonight, it merely surprised him. Eleanor glanced up from her book. You look terrible. Sebastian closed the door behind him. Good evening to you as well. I am serious. She studied him carefully. You look as though someone finally handed you a mirror. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Eleanor always possessed that talent. Genevieve invited you? Of course. She closed her book. She worries I spend too much time alone. Sebastian sat across from her. Silence lingered briefly. Then Eleanor tilted her head. You know she is leaving. The directness stunned him. She told you? Months ago. Another answer everyone seemed to know except him. Eleanor watched realization cross his face. Ah! Sebastian rubbed a hand across his jaw. How many people knew? Very few. She paused. The people closest to her. Which made sense. Which somehow hurt. And none of you thought to mention it? Eleanor stared at him. Genuine disbelief filled her expression. Why would we? The question caught him off guard. Because... He stopped. Because what? Because someone should have warned him? Protected him from consequences. The thought sounded absurd. Eleanor's gaze softened slightly. Sebastian. His name sounded unusually gentle. Genevieve spent years trying to be heard. Silence followed. Eventually she stopped speaking. The words settled heavily between them. Eleanor continued quietly. Do you know what she told me 3 months ago? He looked up. What? She said she finally understood something. Sebastian waited. Eleanor's voice lowered. Being lonely beside someone hurts more than being lonely by yourself. Complete silence followed. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere beyond the windows, evening darkness settled across Ravenshire. Sebastian stared into the flames. He could not remember the last time anyone spoke to him this honestly. Perhaps because few people dared. Eleanor rose from her chair, then paused beside the door. For what it is worth, she said softly. She never stopped believing you were a good man. The statement should have felt comforting. Instead it felt devastating. Because a good man should have noticed. A good man should have listened. A good man should have known his wife was preparing to leave months before she finally said the words aloud. After Eleanor departed, Sebastian remained alone in the library. Darkness deepened outside. Firelight flickered across shelves and walls. Slowly, his gaze settled on a stack of correspondence resting near Genevieve's usual chair. Most were ordinary. Charity reports, community requests, school documents. Then he noticed something else. A folder partially tucked beneath the others. Curious, he pulled it free. Several letters slipped loose. Scholarship requests, donation acknowledgments, personal notes from families throughout the county. He read one, then another, then another. Gratitude filled every page. Not because she was a duchess, because she showed up, because she listened, because she cared. One letter in particular caught his attention. A mother thanking Genevieve for helping her daughter attend college. Near the bottom, a handwritten sentence stood out. You saw her when no one else did. Sebastian read the line twice, then a third time. Slowly, painfully, a realization emerged. The entire county seemed filled with people Genevieve had seen. Encouraged, protected, supported. Children. Teachers, farmers, families, entire communities. She noticed everyone except herself. And he somehow had failed to notice her. The truth sat quietly in the darkness beside him. Unavoidable now, impossible to ignore. For years Sebastian believed Genevieve lived in his world. Tonight he finally began to understand the opposite might be true. Ravenshire had never revolved around him at all. It revolved around her. And if she left, the loss would reach far beyond a marriage. The loss would touch every corner of the life he had taken for granted. The following afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Ravenshire Hall. Genevieve learned of his arrival while reviewing scholarship applications in the sunroom overlooking the South Gardens. Warm spring light streamed through the glass. Birds moved among flowering hedges. For the first time in days, she felt something resembling peace. It lasted approximately 30 seconds. A footman appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace." She looked up from the papers. "Yes. Lord Blackwood is here." Surprise flickered briefly across her features. "Nathaniel." "Yes, Your Grace." The footman hesitated. "He requested a few moments of your time." Genevieve set aside the applications. Nathaniel rarely visited without reason. Of course. 10 minutes later she found him in the drawing room. He stood near a window overlooking the front drive. Sunlight illuminated one side of his face while the other remained partially shadowed. The effect made him appear thoughtful, more serious than usual. Nathaniel turned as she entered. "Thank you for seeing me. You make that sound unusually formal." A faint smile touched his expression. "Perhaps I am feeling unusually formal." The answer immediately caught her attention. Something was different. She sensed it before either of them sat down. "What happened?" Nathaniel exhaled slowly, then reached into his coat and withdrew a leather folder. "I wanted your opinion before making a decision." Relief appeared. Not an emergency, merely work. She almost laughed at herself. Nathaniel handed over the folder. "The New Educational Foundation." Genevieve opened it immediately. Several pages outlined a proposal for expanding scholarship programs across neighboring counties. Endowment projections, administrative structures, long-term funding plans. The scale impressed her instantly. "This is ambitious." "That is a polite way of saying expensive." "Extremely expensive." Nathaniel laughed softly. The familiar sound eased some of the tension in the room. They spent nearly an hour discussing the proposal. Funding strategies, community partnerships, practical concerns, future opportunities. The conversation flowed naturally, easily, as it always had. Genevieve valued intelligent discussions. Nathaniel provided them without effort. He listened carefully, considered ideas seriously, never dismissed opinions simply because they differed from his own. It was a quality she appreciated more than she sometimes admitted. Unfortunately, someone else noticed as well. Sebastian entered the drawing room midway through the discussion. Neither Genevieve nor Nathaniel heard him immediately. They were examining projected budgets spread across a table near the windows. "If we combine the scholarship programs," Genevieve said, studying one page, "the administrative costs drop significantly." Nathaniel leaned slightly closer. "That is exactly what I was thinking." "Then why did you not propose it?" "Because I wanted to see whether you would." Genevieve shook her head. "That is a terrible management strategy." "It worked. Only accidentally." Laughter followed. Light, genuine, comfortable. Sebastian stopped several feet inside the doorway. For reasons he could not immediately identify, the scene irritated him. Not because anything inappropriate occurred. Nothing did. Not because Nathaniel behaved improperly. He did not. The irritation came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere considerably less reasonable. Genevieve looked happy. Not wildly happy. Simply relaxed. Engaged. Present. A version of herself he had not seen in years. The realization struck unexpectedly. Nathaniel noticed him first. "Your Grace." Genevieve turned. Surprise crossed her face briefly. Then politeness returned. "Sebastian." He nodded. "Lord Blackwood." Nathaniel rose. "I hope we are not disturbing you." "Not at all." The answer sounded colder than intended. Sebastian immediately regretted it. Nathaniel appeared not to notice, or perhaps chose not to. We were discussing the foundation proposal. Genevieve handed Sebastian one of the documents. He accepted it automatically, then realized he was holding financial projections without reading a single word. His attention remained elsewhere, specifically on the ease between them, the familiarity, the mutual respect. An uncomfortable thought emerged. Nathaniel saw her, not as a duchess, not as an obligation, not as a permanent fixture inside Ravenshire Hall. He saw her as a person. The realization lingered long after the meeting ended. Later that evening, Sebastian found himself returning to the estate archives. The anonymous contributions still bothered him. More accurately, the unanswered questions bothered him. Genevieve's departure had exposed a truth he could no longer ignore. He knew far less about his wife than he should. The archives occupied an entire section of the West Wing. Dust-covered shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Decades of records filled cabinets and storage boxes. Sebastian spent nearly 2 hours reviewing financial summaries. Most proved ordinary. Estate expenses, agricultural investments, infrastructure improvements. Then he found something unusual. A folder labeled Community Relief Initiative. 8 years old. Dated shortly before his marriage. Curious, he opened it. Several pages detailed a proposed assistance program for struggling families after severe winter storms. Funding approved. Construction approved. Implementation approved. Yet one page appeared different. A handwritten note clipped near the back. Supplemental contributions secured. Private source requested confidentiality. Amount transferred immediately. Sebastian stared at the figure. $50,000. 8 years ago, the amount was enormous. He turned another page. Similar notation. Another private contribution. Then another. Then another. The pattern continued across multiple projects. Each time a shortfall appeared, anonymous money solved the problem. Each time someone deliberately concealed the source. A quiet knock interrupted his concentration. Sebastian looked up. Mr. Langley stood in the doorway once again. Your Grace. Sebastian held up the documents. We need to talk. Langley sighed softly, as though he had anticipated this conversation. I suspected we might. These contributions. Sebastian pointed toward the records. How long did they continue? The advisor remained silent. Langley. Another pause followed. Then the older man entered fully and closed the door behind him. Years. How many years? Most of the marriage. The answer landed heavily. Sebastian stared. Most. Langley nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room. Why? Sebastian asked quietly. Because projects needed funding. No. Frustration entered his voice. Why hide it? Langley looked at him carefully, almost sadly. Because Her Grace requested it. Again, the same answer, yet somehow more painful this time. Sebastian lowered his gaze to the documents. How much money are we discussing? The question seemed simple. The response was not. Langley hesitated, then spoke carefully. Enough to matter. That is not a number. No. Another pause. And it is not my information to share. Sebastian closed the folder slowly. You are protecting her. I am honoring a promise. The distinction carried weight. More weight than Sebastian liked. After Langley departed, evening shadows deepened around the archive room. Sebastian remained seated alone among stacks of records. Questions continued multiplying. Why hide the contributions? Why never mention them? Why sacrifice so much while asking for no recognition? None of it made sense. Unless Genevieve genuinely never expected anything in return. The possibility unsettled him, because it revealed a level of generosity he was not certain he understood. The following day brought another surprise. A spring fundraising luncheon took place in a neighboring town. Genevieve attended. So did Sebastian. Officially, they represented Ravenshire. Unofficially, Sebastian found himself reluctant to let too much time pass without seeing her. The realization remained deeply inconvenient. The luncheon occupied a historic estate overlooking rolling countryside. Guests filled elegant gardens. Tables lined the terraces. Community leaders mingled beneath white tents decorated with flowers. Everything proceeded pleasantly, until Nathaniel arrived. He greeted Genevieve warmly. She smiled. They began discussing the scholarship foundation almost immediately. Sebastian watched from across the terrace while pretending interest in a conversation about crop rotation. The effort failed completely. "You are staring." The voice belonged to Lady Victoria. Sebastian nearly sighed. "I am not." Victoria raised one eyebrow. "You absolutely are." He looked away immediately, which only made matters worse. Victoria laughed. "Interesting." "What is?" "You." Sebastian frowned. "That is rarely a good sign." "Usually not." She accepted a glass of lemonade from a passing server. "Would you like some advice?" "No." "Excellent." Her smile widened. "I was going to give it anyway." Sebastian considered leaving. Unfortunately, curiosity won. "Very well." Victoria glanced toward Genevieve and Nathaniel. "The problem is not that Lord Blackwood sees her." Confusion crossed his face. "What problem?" "Exactly." Victoria shook her head. "The problem is that you are only now noticing that he does." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Before Sebastian could respond, Victoria continued. "Everyone notices, by the way." His stomach tightened unexpectedly. "Notices what?" "That he admires her." She sounded almost surprised he needed clarification. "It is hardly a secret." Silence followed. Sebastian turned toward Genevieve automatically. She stood near a rose garden discussing something with Nathaniel. Sunlight caught strands of her hair. She laughed at one of his comments. The sight produced an immediate reaction. Sharp, unpleasant, entirely unfamiliar. Jealousy. Real jealousy. Not political rivalry. Not competitive irritation. Something personal. Something far more dangerous. He hated it instantly, mostly because he could not dismiss it. Victoria watched understanding spread across his face. "Ah!" Sebastian looked away again. "Do not say it." "I wasn't going to." She paused. "Though this is becoming fascinating." Several hours later, the luncheon ended. Guests departed gradually. Carriages lined the entrance road. Genevieve stood beside hers speaking with Nathaniel one final time. Sebastian found himself watching despite every intention not to. Nathaniel handed her a folder. She accepted it, then smiled. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing improper. Yet when Nathaniel briefly touched the brim of his hat before leaving, Genevieve's expression softened in a way Sebastian could not stop noticing. The carriage ride back to Ravenshire passed in silence. Finally Genevieve glanced toward him. "You seem distracted." Sebastian looked out the window. Fields blurred past beneath the afternoon sun. "Do I?" "Yes." Pause followed. "More than usual." He almost laughed. The observation felt absurdly accurate. More than usual. Because for the first time in years, everything that once seemed simple had become complicated. His marriage, his wife, his feelings, the future. Nothing remained straightforward anymore. Genevieve studied him briefly, then returned her attention to the landscape outside. Neither spoke again. Yet long after Ravenshire appeared on the horizon, Sebastian continued hearing Victoria's words. "The problem is not that Lord Blackwood sees her. The problem is that you are only now noticing that he does." And for the first time since Genevieve announced she was leaving, a new fear joined all the others. Not simply that he might lose her, that someone else might already understand her far better than he ever had. The answer arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Not dramatically, not through a grand revelation, simply through a conversation Sebastian had been pursuing for days. He found Mr. Langley in the estate accounting office reviewing quarterly reports. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Ledgers covered nearly every available surface. The room smelled faintly of ink and paper. Sebastian closed the door behind him. "We are finishing this discussion today." Langley looked up from his desk. Resignation immediately crossed his face. "Your Grace. You promised Her Grace confidentiality." "Yes. I respect that." Sebastian crossed the room slowly. "But she is leaving." Silence followed. Langley removed his spectacles. "I know. And I still do not understand why everyone seems determined to protect her secrets, while she walks away carrying the consequences alone. The older man studied him carefully. Do you truly wish to know? Sebastian felt his pulse quicken slightly. Yes. Langley looked toward the rain-streaked windows, then back again. Very well. The answer came quietly, almost reluctantly. But understand something first. Sebastian waited. Her Grace never hid these things for herself. Another pause followed. She hid them for you. Confusion immediately appeared. For me. Langley nodded. Sit down, Your Grace. Several minutes later, Sebastian found himself staring at documents spread across a large oak table. Old financial records, estate reports, emergency loan agreements, letters from banks, correspondence dating back nearly 7 years. Langley opened one file after another. You inherited Ravenshire during a difficult period. Sebastian frowned. I know that. You know part of it. The advisor slid another report across the table. You inherited responsibility. His expression darkened slightly. You did not inherit stability. Sebastian picked up the document. His stomach tightened immediately. Debt figures, outstanding obligations, agricultural losses, infrastructure costs, numbers far worse than he remembered. This cannot be correct. It is. Langley folded his hands. The estate was much closer to financial crisis than anyone publicly admitted. Rain continued falling outside. The sound suddenly seemed louder. Why was I never told? Langley almost smiled. Not from amusement. From disbelief. You were told. Sebastian looked up sharply. What? Repeatedly. The answer stunned him. Then why do I not remember? Langley held his gaze. Because every report that reached your desk showed solutions already in place. Silence followed. Long silence. Then understanding began creeping slowly across Sebastian's face. Solutions. Yes. Langley slid forward another folder. Provided quietly, consistently, without recognition. Sebastian opened it. Inside rested copies of financial transfers, personal accounts, private investments, emergency funding arrangements. His eyes widened as he read the figures. $25,000, 40,000, 30,000, 50,000. Again, again, again. The numbers continued for years. Who? The question barely emerged. Langley's expression softened. Her Grace. The room seemed to stop. Rain, clocks, everything. Sebastian stared at the documents, certain he had misunderstood. No. Yes. This is impossible. I assure you it is not. Sebastian picked up another page. Then another. Everyone led to the same conclusion. The same name. The same source. Genevieve. 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 His hands felt strangely unsteady. How much? Langley exhaled slowly. Nearly half her inheritance. The words landed like a physical blow. Sebastian lowered the papers. Half. Over several years. Langley nodded. Perhaps slightly more. Silence swallowed the room. Half her inheritance. Not a donation. Not a charitable contribution. Half. Sebastian stared toward the window without seeing it. His mind refused to process the information. Why? Langley laughed softly. A sad sound. Because the estate mattered. That is not enough. No. The advisor looked at him carefully. You mattered. The truth settled heavily between them. Sebastian felt something crack deep inside his chest. Why did she never tell me? Langley reached for another letter. This one handwritten, folded many times, worn with age. Because she knew how much pride you carried. Sebastian accepted it automatically. The handwriting belonged to Genevieve. He recognized it instantly. What is this? A letter she sent me 6 years ago. Langley hesitated. I kept a copy because I believed someday it might matter. Sebastian unfolded the page. His eyes moved across the words. Mr. Langley, please proceed with the transfer. Under no circumstances is His Grace to be informed. He already carries enough responsibility. If the estate recovers, the credit belongs to him. If difficulties continue, the burden should not increase. I ask only that the families be protected. Nothing else matters. Sebastian stopped reading. He could not continue immediately. Something tightened painfully in his throat. Langley remained silent, allowing the truth to settle. Eventually Sebastian looked up. She gave away half her inheritance. His voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. To save Ravenshire. Yes. And she never wanted anyone to know. Correct. Another pause followed. Not even me. Langley shook his head. Especially not you. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. Memory after memory began rearranging itself. Every successful recovery. Every project somehow funded. Every crisis resolved. All those years he believed he had saved Ravenshire. Believed he carried the estate through difficult times. Believed his sacrifices had preserved everything. The reality was infinitely worse. He had never carried the burden alone. Genevieve had carried it beside him. Quietly, invisibly, without acknowledgement, without gratitude, without even being seen. The realization hurt more than any accusation could have. There is more. Langley's voice interrupted his thoughts. Sebastian opened his eyes. More. The advisor nodded toward another folder. The schools. Sebastian stared. The schools. Many of the scholarships came from her personal funds. Another folder. The medical clinic. Another. The agricultural relief programs. Another. Winter assistance grants. The pile continued growing. Sebastian felt increasingly unable to breathe. Every folder revealed another sacrifice. Another contribution. Another act of generosity he never noticed. Eventually he pushed back from the table. Not because he wished to leave. Because remaining seated had become impossible. He crossed toward the window. Rain blurred the landscape beyond the glass. Ravenshire stretched across the horizon. Fields, villages, homes, lives. Suddenly he saw them differently. Not as accomplishments. As evidence. Evidence of her. Why are you telling me now? The question emerged quietly. Langley considered his answer. Because she is leaving. Sebastian closed his eyes. Pain spread through him with startling clarity. Yes. And because if she goes, Langley continued gently, you deserve to know who she truly is. Silence followed. The kind that changes people. Hours later, Sebastian wandered through Ravenshire without destination. The rain had stopped. Evening sunlight broke through the clouds. Golden light washed across stone pathways and gardens. Yet he barely noticed the beauty around him. His thoughts remained trapped in the accounting office. Half her inheritance. The words repeated endlessly. He eventually found himself near the village school. Children played outside while teachers supervised from nearby benches. Their laughter drifted across the grounds. Sebastian watched quietly from a distance. Then he noticed a plaque mounted beside the entrance. He had walked past it countless times, never reading it. Today he did. Dedicated to educational opportunity for every child regardless of circumstance. Established through the generosity of an anonymous benefactor. Anonymous. He laughed once. The sound broke halfway through. Not because anything was funny. Because suddenly the entire county seemed filled with monuments to a woman nobody properly thanked. By the time darkness settled across Ravenshire, Sebastian returned home exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. He entered the library expecting solitude. Instead he found Genevieve seated beside the fire reading a book. The sight nearly stopped him. She looked exactly as she always had. Calm, elegant, unremarkable in the most extraordinary way. For several moments he simply stood there, watching her turn a page, watching the firelight dance across her features, watching the woman who had saved his estate, protected his people, and sacrificed a fortune without asking for recognition. Genevieve eventually sensed his presence and looked up. Sebastian. Her expression softened slightly. You startled me. He opened his mouth, then stopped. What could he possibly say? Thank you felt absurdly inadequate. Sorry felt even worse. 7 years suddenly seemed far too short to contain everything he needed to express. Genevieve studied him carefully. Is something wrong? The question almost broke him, because she genuinely sounded concerned. Concerned for him. Even now. Even after everything. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. No. His voice came out rougher than intended. He stopped again. Genevieve waited patiently. Finally, he managed the truth. I learned something today. Curiosity appeared in her eyes. About what? Sebastian stared at her. Really stared. For perhaps the first time since their wedding day. About you. Something unreadable crossed her expression. Then vanished. She lowered her gaze to the book in her lap. That sounds dangerous. Normally he might have smiled. Tonight he could not. Because the danger was real. The more he learned about Genevieve Ashford, the more impossible it became to understand how he had ever mistaken her for someone ordinary. And for the first time since she announced she was leaving, a terrible realization settled fully into place. Losing her would not simply be losing a wife. It would be losing the best thing that had ever happened to Ravenshire. Perhaps the best thing that had ever happened to him. He was only beginning to understand that. And he feared, with growing certainty, that the understanding had arrived far too late. 3 days later, Ravenshire Hall hosted the largest spring charity gala in the county. The event had been scheduled for months. Educational leaders, local officials, landowners, and philanthropists traveled from neighboring regions to attend. More than 300 guests filled the estate by late afternoon. Carriages lined the circular drive. Servants moved through corridors carrying flowers and candles. Musicians rehearsed beneath crystal chandeliers. The atmosphere felt festive, elegant, important. Genevieve stood before a mirror in her dressing room, fastening a pair of pearl earrings. The reflection staring back at her looked calm, far calmer than she actually felt. The previous week had altered something between herself and Sebastian. Not dramatically, not through declarations or grand gestures, through attention. He noticed things now, small things. The tea she preferred in the morning. The books she left half-finished beside her chair. The names of scholarship students she mentioned casually during dinner. The changes unsettled her more than she cared to admit, because they arrived after she stopped expecting them. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Mrs. Parker entered carrying a folded shawl. She studied Genevieve carefully. You look beautiful. Genevieve smiled faintly. That sounds suspiciously like encouragement. It is encouragement. The maid adjusted the shawl over her arm. Tonight will be difficult. It is only a charity gala. Mrs. Parker raised an eyebrow. And everyone in the county knows you are receiving the Community Legacy Award. Genevieve sighed softly. The award. Another recognition. Another ceremony. The very thing that had been interrupted days earlier. After the cancellation, local leaders insisted on presenting the honor publicly during tonight's gala. She had attempted to refuse. Repeatedly. They had ignored her. I still think the attention is unnecessary. Mrs. Parker laughed. That is exactly why you deserve it. Downstairs, guests continued arriving. Sebastian stood near the grand staircase greeting visitors alongside several members of the organizing committee. Ordinarily, he would have focused on logistics. Tonight his attention drifted repeatedly toward the upper floor. Waiting, watching, looking for her. The realization would have embarrassed him weeks ago. Now it simply felt inevitable. Nathaniel Blackwood arrived shortly before 6 o'clock. The two men exchanged polite greetings. Respectful. Civil. Yet beneath the surface, Sebastian found himself increasingly aware of the other man's presence. Not because Nathaniel had done anything wrong. Because Nathaniel represented something Sebastian could no longer ignore. A man who listened when Genevieve spoke. A man who noticed her accomplishments. A man who understood her value without requiring 7 years to recognize it. You seem distracted. Nathaniel's observation arrived quietly. Sebastian almost smiled despite himself. Apparently everyone keeps noticing that. Perhaps because it is obvious. The answer carried no judgment. Only honesty. They were interrupted moments later by a wave of applause near the staircase. Sebastian turned instinctively. Genevieve had appeared. Conversation throughout the hall softened almost immediately. Not because she wore the most elaborate gown. She did not. Not because she demanded attention. She never would. The reaction happened because people genuinely admired her. Deep blue silk complemented her fair complexion. Pearl earrings caught the light whenever she moved. Yet what struck Sebastian most was not her appearance. It was the way people smiled when they saw her. Teachers, volunteers, community leaders, families she had helped. Their affection filled the room. Real affection. Earned affection. Genevieve descended the staircase slowly. For a brief moment, her eyes met Sebastian's. Something passed between them. Uncertainty perhaps. Or memory. Then the moment disappeared beneath greetings and conversation. The gala proceeded smoothly throughout the evening. Donations exceeded expectations. Scholarship commitments increased. Several major funding initiatives received support. By every practical measure, the event represented a tremendous success. Then came the award presentation. The ballroom quieted as the chairman of the county council stepped onto the stage. Unlike the previous attempt, no emergency interrupted this ceremony. No cancellations. No delays. Hundreds of guests turned their attention forward. There are individuals who improve a community through wealth. The chairman's voice carried clearly through the room. Others improve it through influence. He paused. And a rare few improve it through kindness, consistency, and sacrifice. Applause followed. Genevieve sat near the front beside Sebastian. She looked mildly uncomfortable already. The chairman smiled warmly. For more than 7 years, one person has quietly transformed lives across this county. More applause. Teachers rose first. Then volunteers. Then dozens of scholarship recipients scattered throughout the audience. Within moments, nearly the entire ballroom stood. Genevieve looked genuinely stunned. Sebastian watched her closely. She blinked several times, as though struggling to process the reaction. The chairman continued. Thousands of people have benefited from her work. His voice softened. Many are in this room tonight. One by one, individuals began speaking. A teacher described the school expansion. A physician discussed the clinic. A former scholarship student spoke about attending college. Then a widow described receiving assistance after losing her home during severe winter storms. Story after story followed, each one revealing another piece of Genevieve's hidden impact. Emotion spread visibly through the ballroom. Guests wiped away tears. Volunteers smiled through proud memories. Even experienced politicians appeared moved. Genevieve sat motionless. Her eyes glistened faintly, yet she never looked away. Finally, the chairman lifted the engraved award. Your Grace. Applause thundered through the room. Please join us. She rose slowly. The standing ovation continued. Hundreds of people remained on their feet. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom. Sebastian felt something tighten painfully inside his chest, because for the first time he truly understood what everyone else already knew. This was not charity, not reputation, not social obligation. This was love. An entire community loved Genevieve. She crossed the stage gracefully and accepted the award. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Eventually, the chairman gestured toward the podium. A few words. Genevieve laughed softly. The audience laughed with her. Then she approached the microphone. Silence settled across the ballroom. She looked down briefly, composed herself, then began. I am not certain I deserve this. Immediate laughter echoed throughout the room. Someone called out, You do. More laughter followed. Genevieve smiled. Thank you. Her gaze moved across the audience. Everything I have accomplished happened because other people chose to help. She spoke about teachers, volunteers, donors, community leaders, everyone except herself. Sebastian found the pattern almost painful now. Then something unexpected happened. A voice interrupted from the back of the ballroom, loud enough for everyone to hear. What about your husband? Silence fell instantly. Genevieve froze. So did Sebastian. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The question had come from an older woman. Not malicious, merely curious. Yet the damage appeared immediately. Everyone knew the rumors. Everyone knew the whispers. 7 years of absence had created a reputation impossible to ignore. The woman seemed to realize her mistake too late. I only meant. She stopped. The ballroom remained silent. Hundreds of people waited, watching, listening. Genevieve stood alone on stage, the award resting in her hands. The same public discomfort she had endured countless times threatened to return once again. Sebastian saw it happen. saw sympathy begin spreading through the crowd, saw guests glance toward Genevieve with pity. Something inside him snapped. Not anger, not outrage, certainty. Before anyone else could speak, Sebastian rose from his chair. The movement immediately drew attention. Conversations stopped. The entire ballroom watched as the Duke of Ravenshire crossed toward the stage. Genevieve stared at him, confused, surprised. He stepped beside her and accepted the microphone from the chairman. Silence deepened further. No one knew what was happening. Neither, if he was honest, did Sebastian. He simply knew he could not allow another moment of public embarrassment. Not again. Not after everything. He looked out across the ballroom. Hundreds of faces stared back, waiting. The question deserves an answer. His voice remained calm, clear, steady. Genevieve's eyes widened slightly. Sebastian continued. What about her husband? Complete silence followed. Then he smiled. Not the formal smile reserved for politics. Something far more personal. Her husband spent 7 years believing he was the one carrying Ravenshire. Confusion flickered across several faces. Sebastian looked toward Genevieve briefly, then back at the audience. He was wrong. The room remained utterly still. Every guest listened. Every guest watched. The truth is much simpler. His voice lowered. The best thing that ever happened to Ravenshire is standing beside me. No one moved. No one breathed. Genevieve stared at him as though she had forgotten how. Sebastian felt his pulse pounding. Yet, for the first time in years, uncertainty no longer mattered. Only truth mattered. And tonight, in front of everyone, he had finally decided to tell it. For several seconds after Sebastian finished speaking, absolute silence filled the ballroom. Hundreds of people stood motionless beneath crystal chandeliers. Candlelight flickered across astonished faces. The musicians had stopped entirely. Even the servants near the walls appeared frozen. Nobody expected this, least of all Genevieve. She stood beside him holding the award with both hands. Her pulse thundered so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Sebastian looked toward her. Not the audience. Not the council members. Her. The distinction mattered. More than she wanted it to. More than she should have allowed. For years, he continued quietly, I believed public recognition embarrassed her because she was modest. A faint ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Now I understand the truth. His eyes never left Genevieve's. She was simply too busy helping everyone else to notice herself. Emotion tightened his voice. The change was subtle, yet unmistakable. Many people in the audience noticed. Genevieve noticed most of all. Sebastian turned back toward the crowd. There are teachers in this room because of her. He gestured toward one section of the ballroom. Students in college because of her. Another section. Families who survived difficult winters because of her. More applause began building, then faded as he continued. And there is a duke standing here tonight because of her. Complete silence returned. Genevieve stared at him. Confusion mixed with disbelief. Sebastian accepted it calmly. The truth should have been spoken years ago. He drew a slow breath. Ravenshire exists as it does today because Genevieve Ashford chose to believe in it when others did not. Gasps sounded across the room. Several council members exchanged surprised glances. Mr. Langley lowered his head slightly. Mrs. Parker pressed a hand against her mouth. The old woman looked moments away from tears. Sebastian continued. She sacrificed more than anyone knows. Another pause. Including me. The admission landed heavily. The honesty made it heavier still. He looked toward Genevieve once more. Especially me. Something shifted inside her chest. Dangerous. Unwanted. Hope. She hated it instantly. Hope had betrayed her before. Yet she could not stop the feeling entirely. Because this was not the Sebastian she knew. This was a man standing before an entire county admitting failure. Publicly. Willingly. No title could make that easy. No pride could survive it comfortably. The ballroom remained completely captivated. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Sebastian handed the microphone back to the chairman, then stepped away from the podium. The audience erupted. Applause crashed through the room like a wave. Guests rose to their feet once more. Some were already standing. Others joined them immediately. The ovation felt even louder than before. Longer. More emotional. Genevieve stood frozen in place while hundreds of people applauded around her. Yet the only person she saw was Sebastian. He did not smile triumphantly. He did not look relieved. If anything, he appeared nervous. The realization shocked her. Sebastian Wycliffe was rarely nervous. The gala eventually resumed. Music returned. Conversations restarted. Dinner was served. Yet the atmosphere had changed permanently. Everywhere Genevieve went, guests approached with warmth and admiration. Many thanked her personally. Others shared stories she had forgotten entirely. One woman described receiving help after losing her husband years earlier. A former scholarship student introduced his young daughter. A retired teacher embraced her with tears in her eyes. Through it all, Genevieve remained gracious, kind, composed. Yet internally she felt unsteady. Not because of the award. Because of Sebastian. She caught him watching her several times throughout the evening. Not casually. Intentionally. As though he were trying to memorize something. The realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Near 10 o'clock, she escaped briefly onto a terrace overlooking the gardens. Cool spring air greeted her immediately. The night sky stretched overhead, clear and bright. Music drifted faintly through open ballroom doors behind her. For several precious moments, she stood alone. Or so she thought. I wondered where you disappeared. Nathaniel's voice arrived gently from nearby. Genevieve turned. Relief appeared instantly. Nathaniel always felt easy, safe, predictable. Hiding. A smile touched his face. You have never been very good at hiding. That is unfortunate. He joined her near the stone railing. Together they looked out across the moonlit gardens. Silence settled comfortably between them. After several moments, Nathaniel spoke again. You deserved tonight. Genevieve looked away. I am not sure I deserved all that attention. You deserved more. The answer came immediately. She laughed softly. You sound remarkably certain. I am. Nathaniel studied her carefully. The entire county agrees with me. Another comfortable silence followed. Then his expression shifted slightly. More serious. More thoughtful. Are you still leaving? The question landed directly in the center of everything she had been trying not to think about. Genevieve gripped the stone railing lightly. Yes. Nathaniel nodded once. He did not argue. Did not pressure. Did not question her reasons. The respect touched her deeply. I understand. She looked toward him. Do you? I think so. His gaze moved toward the ballroom windows glowing against the darkness. Though understanding something does not mean liking it. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Nathaniel had been a good friend. A genuinely good friend. One of the few people who never demanded anything from her. Thank you. His smile returned. Gentle. Familiar. For what? For seeing me. The words escaped before she could stop them. Nathaniel's expression softened immediately. Genevieve. She looked away, embarrassed suddenly. Yet Nathaniel only shook his head. That should never have been rare enough to deserve thanks. Before she could respond, movement near the terrace doors caught her attention. Sebastian had stepped outside. He stopped immediately upon noticing them together. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt strangely fragile. Nathaniel recovered first. Your Grace. Sebastian nodded. Lord Blackwood. Polite. Civil. Yet Genevieve sensed tension beneath the surface. Nathaniel seemed to notice it as well. He smiled faintly. I should return inside. Genevieve opened her mouth to protest. Then stopped. Nathaniel had already made his decision. He inclined his head politely toward both of them and disappeared through the terrace doors, leaving her alone with Sebastian. The moment the doors closed, silence settled once more. Not comfortable silence. Not awkward silence. Something more complicated. Moonlight illuminated the terrace. Music drifted softly from inside. Somewhere beyond the gardens, an owl called through the darkness. Finally Sebastian spoke. You thanked him. Genevieve frowned slightly. For being a friend. I know. He looked out across the gardens. He seems like a good one. The answer surprised her. She had expected irritation. Perhaps jealousy. Instead she heard something else. Regret. He is. Sebastian nodded slowly. I can see that. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Genevieve looked toward him carefully. What happened tonight? The question emerged quietly. Honest curiosity. Nothing more. Sebastian laughed softly. Not because anything amused him, because he had been asking himself the same thing. I finally became tired of hearing lies. Lies. The biggest one. He met her gaze. That none of it mattered. Emotion tightened the space between them. Dangerous emotion. The kind she no longer trusted. Sebastian. Her voice softened unintentionally. He looked away first. Toward the gardens. Toward the darkness. Anywhere except directly at her. I spent years believing I was fulfilling my responsibilities. The confession sounded difficult. Perhaps I was. Pause followed. But I neglected everything else. Genevieve said nothing. He continued. I thought providing security was enough. Another pause. I thought loyalty was enough. His voice lowered. I was wrong. The words hung in the air between them. Real. Unpolished. Honest. For the first time since their conversation in the library, Genevieve saw no defense in him. No justification. No explanation. Only truth. The sight frightened her, because it would have been easier if he remained unchanged. Easier if he stayed distant. Easier if she could continue believing her decision required no reconsideration. Instead, the man standing beside her seemed determined to become someone new. Why now? The question escaped before she could stop it. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. The answer arrived after several long seconds. Because I finally looked. Moonlight reflected faintly in his eyes when he opened them again. And once I did, I could not stop seeing what I missed. Silence followed. Deep silence. Emotional silence. The kind neither of them knew how to navigate. Eventually music from the ballroom shifted into a slower melody. Guests laughed somewhere beyond the terrace doors. Life continued, yet neither moved. Neither seemed ready to leave. Finally Sebastian spoke once more. I do not expect forgiveness. Genevieve looked toward him. Good. A faint smile touched his mouth. The first genuine smile she had seen in days. That seems fair. Unexpectedly, she almost smiled back. The realization startled her. So did the warmth that followed. Not love. Not trust. Those things required more than one speech and one evening. But perhaps something else. Possibility. Small. Fragile. Uncertain. Yet present. And for the first time since writing the letter hidden inside her desk, Genevieve found herself wondering whether certainty had become slightly more complicated than before. The morning after the gala arrived bright and unusually warm. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Ravenshire Hall. Birds filled the gardens with restless energy. Spring seemed determined to announce itself in every possible way. Genevieve sat in the breakfast room staring at a cup of tea she had not touched. Sleep had been difficult. Not because of the award. Not because of the speeches. Because of the conversation on the terrace. Because of Sebastian. Because somewhere beneath years of disappointment, a dangerous question had begun quietly resurfacing. What if he truly had changed? She disliked the question immediately. Questions created uncertainty. Uncertainty created hope. Hope had cost her enough already. A newspaper rested beside her plate. The county edition had arrived early. Across the front page sat a photograph from the previous evening. Genevieve accepting the Community Legacy Award while surrounded by applause. She grimaced. Public attention remained one of her least favorite experiences. A second photograph occupied the lower corner. This one captured Sebastian standing beside her during his speech. The image unsettled her far more. You are frowning at the newspaper. She looked up. Sebastian stood in the doorway. No reports in his hands. No correspondence. No indication he planned to vanish into work. The change remained disorienting. The newspaper deserves it. He crossed toward the table. What did it do? Printed photographs. A faint smile touched his mouth. A terrible crime. She almost smiled back. Almost. The near smile bothered her more than the conversation itself. Sebastian sat across from her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. Less empty. More uncertain. Eventually he reached into his coat and removed a folded envelope. This arrived early this morning. Genevieve accepted it curiously. The county council seal marked the front. She opened the letter and scanned the contents. Confusion appeared almost immediately, then surprise, then complete disbelief. Sebastian. Yes. This cannot be serious. It is. She looked at the page again, then at him, then back at the page. They want to rename the Scholarship Foundation. Apparently. Genevieve stared. After me. Apparently. Absolutely not. The answer arrived instantly. Sebastian laughed softly. I suspected that might be your reaction. It is a ridiculous idea. Most of the county disagrees. The county is wrong. He watched her for a moment, then said something unexpected. Perhaps it should not be your decision. Genevieve blinked. Excuse me? You spent years deciding what everyone else deserved. His expression softened. Maybe they should decide what you deserve. The observation lingered, uncomfortable because it contained truth. Before she could respond, another servant entered carrying additional correspondence. Among the letters rested a cream-colored envelope she recognized immediately. Nathaniel. Her pulse shifted slightly. She hated that Sebastian noticed. More accurately, she hated that he noticed and remained perfectly calm about it. Lord Blackwood writes frequently. The comment sounded neutral, almost casual. Genevieve narrowed her eyes. That sounds suspicious. It was an observation. A suspicious observation. To her surprise, Sebastian laughed. A real laugh. Brief but genuine. The sound transformed his entire face. For a moment she found herself remembering the man she married. The realization hurt unexpectedly. The remainder of the morning passed quietly. Shortly after noon, Genevieve left for the village academy. Several scholarship students were presenting research projects. She had promised to attend weeks earlier. Normally she traveled alone. Today, however, Sebastian appeared beside the carriage moments before departure. You are coming? She asked. If you do not object. You have become remarkably persistent. I have been informed persistence is useful. She suspected Eleanor or Victoria had offered that advice. Possibly both. The academy buzzed with activity when they arrived. Students filled classrooms and hallways. Teachers guided visitors between exhibits. Parents proudly admired projects displayed throughout the building. Genevieve immediately disappeared into conversations, encouraging students, asking questions, celebrating achievements. Sebastian followed quietly, watching, learning, noticing. The pattern continued for most of the afternoon. Then, near the end of the event, a familiar voice interrupted. Your Grace. Genevieve turned. Nathaniel approached carrying several folders beneath one arm. Warm amusement lit his expression. I suspected I would find you here. The children are presenting projects. Exactly why I looked here first. Sebastian stood several feet away speaking with the headmaster. Yet Genevieve noticed something immediately. Nathaniel's smile seemed different today. More restrained. More thoughtful. The realization unsettled her. Eventually the crowd shifted enough to create a brief moment of privacy. Nathaniel glanced toward the far side of the room where Sebastian continued speaking with local officials. Then back at her. May I ask something? Genevieve nodded. Of course. Nathaniel hesitated. A rare occurrence. Are you happy? The question caught her completely off guard. She stared at him. That is a dangerous question. I know. His smile faded slightly. That is why I asked it. Silence followed. Around them, students continued presenting projects. Parents continued celebrating accomplishments. Yet the world seemed strangely distant. Genevieve looked down briefly, then back up. I do not know. The honesty surprised even her. Nathaniel accepted it quietly. No judgment, no pressure, only understanding. That is a fair answer. Another pause followed. Then he nodded once, as though confirming something privately. Good. Confusion crossed her face. Good. Nathaniel's smile returned, smaller this time, sadder. Because if you had sounded certain, I would have worried. Before she could ask what he meant, several students rushed toward them carrying award certificates. The moment disappeared. Yet the conversation remained with her. Much later that evening, another surprise awaited. Ravenshire Hall hosted a small dinner for educators visiting from neighboring counties. Nothing elaborate, only 20 guests. Meaningful conversations, community planning, future initiatives. Genevieve enjoyed these gatherings. They focused on practical outcomes rather than social performance. During dessert, one visiting administrator rose unexpectedly. "Before we conclude," she said warmly, "there is one matter I would like to address." Genevieve immediately sensed danger. The administrator smiled toward her. "Many of us have spent years benefiting from Her Grace's work." Several guests nodded. Others murmured agreement. Genevieve considered hiding beneath the table. The possibility seemed increasingly attractive. Then the administrator continued. "We often celebrate institutions." Another smile. "Rarely the people who create them." Applause followed. Genevieve prepared herself for another uncomfortable public tribute. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. One by one, guests began sharing stories. Not grand accomplishments, small moments. A teacher described receiving encouragement during a difficult year. A principal recalled Genevieve attending a school play despite terrible weather. Another guest remembered her spending hours helping students prepare scholarship applications. Story after story emerged. Simple acts of kindness, quiet acts of generosity. The cumulative effect proved overwhelming. Because these were not achievements. They were memories, human memories, personal memories. By the time the final speaker finished, several guests appeared emotional. Genevieve certainly did. Then the administrator smiled toward Sebastian. "Your Grace." He looked up. "Yes. You must be very proud." Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Anticipatory silence. Every guest waited. Sebastian looked toward Genevieve. Their eyes met. For a brief moment nobody else existed. Then he answered. "Proud is too small a word." The room grew very quiet. His voice remained calm, steady, honest. "I spent years assuming I understood greatness." He smiled faintly. "It turns out I was living with it." Emotion swept through the room immediately. Several guests exchanged knowing looks. One elderly teacher dabbed at her eyes. Genevieve could not look away. Because there was no performance in him now. No obligation. No public expectation. Only truth. Later, after the guests departed and the house grew quiet, Genevieve wandered into the West Gardens alone. Night had settled comfortably across Ravenshire. Stars glittered overhead. Cool air carried the scent of spring flowers. She needed space to think. Unfortunately, thinking had become increasingly complicated. Footsteps sounded behind her. She already knew who it would be. Sebastian stopped beside the garden fountain. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he looked toward her. "I met with Parliament this afternoon." Genevieve frowned slightly. "You traveled to London?" "No." A faint smile appeared. "They traveled here." Surprise flickered across her face. "Why?" Sebastian's expression shifted. More serious now. "Because I resigned from 3 committees." Complete silence followed. Genevieve stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? 3 committees? Why?" The answer came immediately. "Because I kept choosing responsibilities that could survive without me." His gaze held hers steadily. "And neglecting people who should not have had to." Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Dangerous emotion. Hope again. Always hope. She looked away first. Toward the fountain. Toward the moonlight reflecting across the water. Anywhere except directly at him. "You cannot change 7 years." Her voice sounded quieter than intended. Sebastian nodded slowly. "I know." Pause followed. Long, meaningful. "But I can change tomorrow." The words settled gently between them. No promises. No dramatic declarations. Just intention. Just effort. Just a man finally learning what mattered. Genevieve stood motionless beside the fountain long after the conversation ended. Because for the first time since deciding to leave, she found herself confronting a possibility she had never planned for. Not that Sebastian would fight her departure. That he would become someone worth staying for. And that possibility frightened her more than anything else. The decision arrived on an ordinary morning. No dramatic storm announced it. No grand crisis forced it. Sunlight drifted across the gardens of Ravenshire Hall. Birds moved through flowering hedges. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed near the village road. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything was different. Genevieve sat alone in the library holding the letter she had written months earlier. The same letter. The same folded pages. The same careful handwriting. For a long time she simply stared at it. Once, this letter represented certainty. Escape. Protection. Now it felt like a question. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She already knew who stood outside. "Come in." Sebastian entered quietly. He stopped when he noticed the letter resting in her hands. Understanding appeared immediately. Neither pretended otherwise. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Sebastian crossed the room. Not too close. Never forcing. Never demanding. Just close enough. "Is that it?" Genevieve looked down at the folded pages. "Yes." His gaze remained on the letter. "The one you wrote 3 months ago." "Yes." Silence settled between them. Comfortable now. Honest. Not empty. The difference mattered. Sebastian slipped one hand into his pocket. Then withdrew something unexpected. A small folded document. Genevieve frowned slightly. "What is that?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "My version." Confusion immediately appeared. "Your version?" He nodded. "I wrote it last night." Slowly he handed it to her. Genevieve accepted the paper and unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page. Then stopped. Then moved again. The letter was brief. Very brief. "Genevieve, if you still wish to leave, I will not stop you. I will not guilt you. I will not argue that you owe me more time. You have already given me 7 years. But before you decide, there is one truth I need you to know. I love you. I should have said it years ago. I should have shown it years ago. I failed at both. If you leave, I will spend the rest of my life regretting that failure. If you stay, I will spend the rest of my life earning the second chance I do not deserve. Sebastian." Genevieve lowered the paper slowly. The room had become very quiet. Her heart had become very loud. Sebastian stood where he was. Waiting. Not pressuring. Waiting. "You never said that before." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I know." Not once. Pain flickered across his expression. "I know that too." She looked away. Toward the window. Toward the gardens. Toward anything except him. Because tears threatened unexpectedly. Not from sadness. From exhaustion. 7 years of longing. 7 years of silence. 7 years of hoping for words she eventually convinced herself would never come. "Why now?" she asked softly. Sebastian took a slow breath. "Because I spent years assuming you already knew." Another breath. "And because I finally learned assumptions are dangerous things." A small laugh escaped her despite everything. The sound surprised them both. Sebastian smiled. She hated that the smile affected her. Hated it because it still mattered. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple." His voice lowered. "Nothing about this is simple." Silence followed. Then Sebastian looked toward the letter in her hands. The original one. The letter that had nearly ended everything. "May I ask something?" Genevieve nodded. "What? What did you write at the end?" She blinked. "You mean the sentence you added after the anniversary?" Sebastian nodded. Curiosity filled his expression. Real curiosity. She looked down at the paper, then slowly unfolded it. For the first time, she handed it to him. Sebastian accepted it carefully, respectfully. His eyes moved across the pages. He read every word, every disappointment, every lonely evening, every anniversary, every effort she had made to keep believing. The truth hurt, yet he continued reading. Finally, he reached the final handwritten sentence. The one she added after the anniversary. His expression changed immediately. Emotion flickered across his face. Raw. Unprotected. He read the sentence a second time, then looked up. "You wrote this the night I missed our anniversary." Genevieve nodded. Sebastian swallowed hard. Because the sentence was simple. "I finally understand that loving someone is not enough when they never seem to notice you are there." The words struck with devastating precision. He folded the letter carefully, then returned it. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Sebastian stepped closer. I noticed too late. The honesty hurt, because it was true. Genevieve looked at him. Really looked at him. The man before her no longer resembled the distant husband she had prepared to leave. Not entirely. He still carried the same strength, the same intelligence, the same sense of duty. Yet something fundamental had changed. Humility, perhaps. Awareness. Love finally given language. I am afraid. The confession escaped before she could stop it. Sebastian's expression softened immediately. Of what? Tears shimmered faintly in her eyes. Of believing you. Silence followed. Then another step. Close enough now to matter. That seems reasonable. She laughed through the tears. Reasonable. After everything? His smile carried sadness. Very reasonable. The answer broke something inside her. Not painfully. Gently. Like a lock finally releasing after years of pressure. Because he was not asking for trust. Not demanding forgiveness. He was acknowledging why she struggled to give either. And somehow that mattered more than any promise. Nathaniel asked me something a few days ago. Sebastian remained still, waiting. He asked whether I was happy. A shadow crossed his face briefly. Yet he nodded. And Genevieve looked toward the sunlight spilling across the library floor. I told him I did not know. Sebastian smiled faintly. That sounds honest. It was. She looked back at him. But I know something now. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sebastian certainly did. Genevieve glanced down at the letter in her hands. The letter that had represented the end of everything. Slowly, she folded it one final time. Then crossed toward the fireplace. Sebastian watched silently. She knelt beside the hearth. Held the pages over the flames. Waited. For a moment nothing happened. Then the fire caught the edge of the paper. The letter curled slowly as orange light consumed the pages. Words disappeared. Sentences vanished. Months of certainty dissolved into ash. Genevieve remained there until the final corner burned away. Then she rose, turned, and found Sebastian staring at her. Hope filled his eyes. Careful hope. Fragile hope. The kind that understood it could still be broken. Does that mean? He stopped, unable to finish. Genevieve smiled. A real smile. The first one he had seen in what felt like years. It means I am not leaving. Relief hit him so visibly that she almost laughed. He closed his eyes briefly, one hand rising toward his face. For a moment, the powerful Duke of Ravenshire looked entirely undone. Thank God. The words emerged quietly. Honestly, she had never heard him sound so vulnerable. Neither had anyone else. Then something unexpected happened. Sebastian laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. The sound of someone surviving a disaster they only recently understood. Genevieve found herself laughing too. Tears and laughter together. Relief and uncertainty tangled into something strangely beautiful. Eventually the laughter faded. The silence that followed felt different from every silence before it. Full. Warm. Alive. Sebastian looked at her carefully. May I ask one more question? You seem determined to ask questions lately. I am making up for lost time. Another smile. Then he grew serious. Will you have tea with me? Genevieve blinked. Tea? Yes. That is your question? It is. She laughed again. Why? Sebastian stepped closer. Close enough now that neither pretended distance mattered anymore. Because years ago I forgot that marriages are built from ordinary moments. His voice softened. And I would like to start there. Emotion rose unexpectedly inside her chest. Not the overwhelming emotion of grand declarations. Something quieter. More lasting. Hope. Real hope this time. The kind supported by actions instead of promises. Genevieve reached for his hand. The gesture surprised both of them. Sebastian looked down briefly, then intertwined his fingers with hers. Neither hurried. Neither spoke. They simply stood together in the sunlight. Present. Finally present. All right? She said softly. Tea sounds nice. His smile answered before words did. Later that afternoon, servants throughout Ravenshire Hall exchanged confused looks when the Duke cancelled several meetings. Teachers arriving for community discussions were shocked to find him attending voluntarily. Mrs. Parker cried openly when she discovered Genevieve had destroyed the letter. Mr. Langley quietly informed several county officials that future scholarship funding would continue unchanged. Across Ravenshire, life moved forward. Children attended schools. Families visited the clinic. Farmers worked their fields. Most never learned the full story. They did not need to. What mattered was simpler. The Duchess stayed. The Duke finally opened his eyes. And somewhere between duty and devotion, two people found their way back to each other. Months later, visitors entering the village academy would notice a new plaque near the entrance. The Genevieve Ashford Foundation for Educational Opportunity. The name remained despite her protests. Every child who passed through those doors would see it. Every family would know what it meant. Yet the most important recognition never appeared on any plaque. It existed in quieter places, in morning conversations over tea, in walks through the gardens, in meetings attended together, in anniversaries celebrated side by side. And whenever anyone asked Sebastian Wycliffe what saved Ravenshire, his answer never changed. He would smile, look toward the woman beside him, and tell the truth. She did.